Hello there, and welcome. I'm so glad you could make it. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a place that lives deep in our collective memory. A dark wood, a selva oscura. It's a place of deep shadows and ancient secrets. A forest so influential it helped shape one of the greatest works of literature ever written. We are going to explore the real, tangible, living world that inspired the allegorical forests of Dante's Inferno. This isn't a story of fiction, but of the far more remarkable truth of ecology and history, of the relationship between humanity and the wild, breathing world that surrounds it. It's a truly remarkable story of how a real place can become a metaphor for the soul. Before we begin our journey, if you enjoy what we do here, this gentle exploration of the natural world, I would be so grateful if you would consider liking this video and perhaps subscribing to the channel. It's a quiet, simple way to help our little community grow. And as always, I love to know where you're listening from. It's a beautiful thought, picturing this story unfurling in rooms all across the globe, a shared moment of quiet. So please, feel free to leave a comment and say hello. Now though, it's time to get comfortable. Turn down the lights. Let your head find that perfect cool spot on the pillow. Take a slow, deep breath in. And as you exhale, feel the day begin to loosen its grip. Let your shoulders soften. Let the noise of the world outside this room fade into a distant murmur. We are leaving that world behind for a little while. We are going to step back in time and shrink down to walk together beneath the primeval canopy of ancient Italy, a world that was old long before Rome was ever a dream. Chapter 1. The Primeval Canopy. Italy's ancient woodlands. Let's begin not with a map or a timeline, but with a feeling. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a great forest, high in the Apennine Mountains of central Italy. It is the 13th century. The air is different here, cooler than in the sun-drenched valley below. It carries the scent of damp earth, of pine resin, and of something else, something ancient and green and alive. The world outside the forest is a place of stone towers, of burgeoning city-states, of politics and commerce, and the clang of the blacksmith's hammer. It is a world of straight lines and sharp angles. But here, at the tray line, that world stops. Before you stands not a collection of trees, but a presence. It is a single unified entity that breathes in the morning mist and exhales the cool, oxygen-rich air of the evening. To step across that threshold, from the open pasture into the shade of the canopy, is to enter another state of being. The light changes instantly. What was the bright, singular light of the sun becomes 1,000 fragmented beams, a soft, dappled emerald glow that filters down through a ceiling of leaves hundreds of feet above. The quality of sound changes too. The sharp noises of the outside world are muffled, dampened by the sheer mass of living wood and foliage. Sound here is softer, more intimate. The rustle of a lizard in the dry leaves, the gentle creak of a branch in a high wind, the distant percussive drumming of a woodpecker, echoing through the trees as if through the nave of a great cathedral. Let's approach one of the elder statesmen of this forest, a great European beech, a Fagus sylvatica. Its trunk is immense, wider than two people can encircle with their arms. The bark is not rough and gnarled like an oak, but smooth and grey, like the skin of a great elephant or a whale. It has the texture and colour of ancient weathered stone. If you were to run your hand over its surface, it would feel cool and solid, a repository of centuries. Lichens, in patterns of pale green and dusty silver, bloom across its surface like maps of forgotten continents. At its base, great buttress roots, thick as a man's thigh, surge out from the trunk and plunge into the earth, anchoring this giant to the planet. They create deep hollows and caves in the soil around them, perfect hiding places for a fox or a badger. This tree is not just living on the land, it is fused with it. It is a feature of the geology as much as the biology. This single tree is an ecosystem in itself. In the crevices of its bark, tiny insects and spiders live out their entire lives. Mosses, thick and velvety, grow in the shaded, damp northern face, each a miniature forest holding on to droplets of water from the last rain. A fern has taken root in a high crook where two massive branches diverge, its fronds hanging down like a green waterfall. Higher still, in the vast vaulted canopy, birds build their nests. A wild boar may come and rub its bristly hide against the solid bark to scratch an itch, leaving a patch of mud and coarse hair. A red squirrel, a flash of auburn energy, might spiral up its trunk, chasing a rival, its claws making almost no sound on the smooth surface. This tree is not an object. It is a city, a bustling, multi-layered society of life, all centered around this one ancient photosynthesizing being. And it is just one of countless millions in this great woodland. To understand this forest, the one that Dante and his contemporaries would have known, we have to peel back the layers of time. We have to understand that this landscape was not static. It was the result of a long and dramatic conversation between human ambition and the patient, relentless power of nature. And that conversation began long before, with the Romans. To a Roman engineer or a senator, a forest, a selva, was primarily a resource. It was a problem to be solved or a commodity to be exploited. The Roman mind was one of order, of straight roads, of gridded cities, of fields measured and divided for agriculture. The wild, chaotic, tangled nature of a primeval forest was an affront to this sense of order. It was the realm of barbarians, a place where armies could be ambushed and where civilization ended. So they set about taming it. Imagine the sound that must have echoed through these mountains for centuries. The rhythmic, percussive ring of the Roman axe, the securus. It wasn't the frantic, destructive clear-cutting we might imagine today. It was a more methodical, organized and sustained process. The forest was seen as a kind of quarry, but for wood, legions of men, slaves and soldiers alike, would have worked in these woods. They were harvesting timber for the burgeoning empire. The tall, straight trunks of the silver firs, the Abies alba, were perfect for the masts of the ever-growing Roman navy, the ships that would conquer the Mediterranean. The strong, reliable wood of the oaks and beeches was needed to build the cities, to frame the roofs of temples and villas, to construct the scaffolding for their magnificent aqueducts and amphitheaters. The forest was also the empire's fuel tank. An immense amount of wood was needed to be converted into charcoal. Picture the charcoal clamps, mounds of earth covering slowly smouldering piles of wood, smoke seeping from the top in a constant hazy plume. This charcoal was the lifeblood of Roman industry. It fired the forges where the iron for the legion's swords and armor was smelted. It heated the water for the famous Roman baths. It cooked the food and warmed the homes of millions. The forest was, in a very real sense, being consumed to power the engine of civilization. The Romans even had a sophisticated system of forest management. They understood concepts like coppicing, cutting certain trees down to the stump and allowing the new straight shoots that emerged to be harvested on a regular cycle. This created a sustainable supply of smaller wood for things like fence posts, tool handles and firewood. They called this a silva cadoa, a cut wood, a managed, productive and tamed forest. It was an extension of the farm, another form of agriculture. But there was another kind of forest in the Roman imagination, a place they called the lucus. This was the sacred grove, the deep, untouched, primeval woodland that had been left standing. These were often places of profound spiritual significance, believed to be inhabited by gods and nature spirits, the fauns, the satyrs, the dryads. A lucus was often associated with a particular deity. To fell a tree in a sacred grove was a terrible sacrilege, an act that could bring the wrath of the gods down upon you. These were pockets of the ancient wild world that even the pragmatic Romans dared not touch. They were islands of primeval chaos, left adrift in a sea of Roman order. So for centuries, a great retreat occurred. The forest line was pushed back, further and further up the slopes of the Apennines. The valleys were cleared for farmland, for vineyards and olive groves. The lower hills were converted to pasture for sheep and goats. The great woodland that had once blanketed the Italian peninsula was fragmented, tamed, and diminished. From the perspective of a Roman administrator, this was progress. This was the triumph of civilization over the wilderness. The world was being made safer, more productive, more Roman. But from the perspective of the forest itself, it was a long, slow and deep wound. And then, things began to change. The engine of the Roman Empire, which had seemed unstoppable, began to sputter and slow. From the 4th and 5th centuries onwards, the central authority of Rome weakened. The great machine of administration, of road maintenance, of tax collection, and of military defense began to fall apart. The incursions of so-called barbarian peoples, the Goths, the Vandals, the Lombards, were not so much an invasion as a symptom of this internal decay. The empire was crumbling from within, and as human order retreated, the forest began its patient, silent advance. This was the beginning of the great rewilding of Italy, the period that would give birth to the dark and tangled woodlands of the Middle Ages. It wasn't a dramatic event. It was a process so slow it would have been imperceptible in a single human lifetime. Imagine a Roman road, once a marvel of engineering, a straight paved artery connecting cities. As the empire fell, the legions that maintained it were no longer there. Cracks would appear in the paving stones. A tiny seed, carried on the wind or in the droppings of a bird, would find purchase in that crack. A weed would grow, its roots patiently exerting a tiny but relentless pressure, then a hardy shrub, then a pioneer tree, like a birch, its silver bark a stark contrast to the dark Roman stone. Over decades, the road would become a green path. Over centuries, it would be swallowed completely, becoming nothing more than a ghost of a straight line beneath the roots of a new forest. Abandoned farms in the valleys were the first to be reclaimed. The neat rows of vines and olives would be invaded by brambles and thorns, a defensive vanguard for the trees that would follow. Fields that once grew wheat would be colonized by grasses, then wildflowers, then the light-loving saplings that thrived in the open sun. Slowly, inexorably, the forest flowed back down the mountainsides, reclaiming the territory it had lost. The sounds of the woods would return to places that had for centuries heard only the sounds of human agriculture. The call of the owl would replace the lowing of cattle at dusk. The tracks of deer and wild boar would be printed in the soft earth where Roman plows had once turned the soil. The new peoples who came to dominate Italy, the Lombards in particular, had a different relationship with the forest. They were a woodland people, hailing from the vast, dark forests of northern Europe. To them, the forest was not an obstacle to be cleared, but a home, a refuge and a larder. They were master hunters and foragers. They knew the rhythms of the forest, the signs of the seasons, the habits of the animals. For them, the woods were a source of identity. Their laws, their myths, their very way of life were intertwined with the forest. The wild boar, a creature of the deep woods, was a powerful symbol of strength and ferocity in their culture. While the Romans had sought to push the forest away from their cities, these new cultures often lived in and amongst it. This process of rewilding continued for centuries. The population of Italy fell dramatically after the fall of Rome due to warfare, famine, and plague. Less people meant less pressure on the land, and so the forest grew. It grew denser, darker, and more extensive than it had been for 1,000 years. By the time we reached the High Middle Ages, the era of Dante, the Italian peninsula was once again a heavily wooded land, but this new forest was different from the one the Romans had first encountered. It was a forest growing over the ruins of a civilization. You might be walking through a deep, dark wood and stumble upon the moss-covered stones of a Roman villa, or the collapsed arch of an ancient bridge half buried in the undergrowth. It was a landscape haunted by the ghosts of the past, a place where the wild had triumphed over the ordered world of man. This was the selva oscura, the dark wood, a real physical place that was dense, dangerous, and full of a wild, untamed power. Now, let's step back into that forest, into this rewilded medieval woodland, and look more closely at its structure. A forest like this is not just a random collection of trees, it is a highly organized, multi-layered society. It has a structure, an architecture, as complex and as functional as any city. Let us begin at the very top, the canopy. This is the great living roof of the forest. From the ground it appears as a mosaic of green against the blue sky, but it is a place of intense competition. Every leaf is a solar panel, angled perfectly to capture the maximum amount of sunlight. Sunlight is the currency of this kingdom, the energy that powers the entire system. Here, hundreds of feet in the air, the great branches of the dominant trees interlace, creating a nearly continuous ceiling. In these Apennine forests, the European beech is often the king. Its leaves are arranged in a very particular way, creating a leaf mosaic so efficient at capturing light that very little can penetrate to the forest floor below. This is why the floor of a mature beech forest is often so open and clear, a place of deep cathedral-like gloom. In spring, the new beech leaves are a vibrant, almost translucent lime green, and the light that filters through them has a magical, ethereal quality. As summer progresses, they darken to a rich, deep green. Then, in autumn, the entire canopy erupts in a blaze of color, yellows, golds, and a coppery russet brown that can make the entire mountainside seem as if it's on fire. The fallen beech leaves create a thick, rustling carpet on the forest floor, a scent of dry, sweet decay that is the very perfume of autumn. Interspersed with the beech, you would find the silver fir. It stands in stark, beautiful contrast. Its needles are a dark, glossy green year-round, giving the forest a sense of life even in the depths of winter. Its shape is conical, a perfect spire reaching for the sky. The scent of a fir forest is entirely different from a beech wood. It is the clean, sharp, medicinal scent of resin. The fir cones stand upright on the branches like candles, and in the autumn they don't fall whole. Instead, they disintegrate scale by scale, releasing their winged seeds to spin down to the forest floor. In winter, when the deciduous beeches are bare, skeletal silhouettes against a grey sky, the fir cones come into their own. Their branches catch and hold the snow, transforming the forest into a silent, white, enchanted world. And then there is the sweet chestnut, Castanea sativa. This tree was so important to the people of medieval Italy that it was known as l'albero del pane, the bread tree. Originally brought to Italy by the Romans from further east, it had naturalized and become a cornerstone of the mountain economy. Its bark is deeply grooved and ridged, twisting as the tree ages. Its leaves are long, serrated and glossy, but its true gift was its fruit. In autumn, the tree produces spiny sea urchin-like casings called burrs. Inside each burr are 2 or 3 shiny brown chestnuts. For the peasants living in these mountains, chestnuts were a staple food. They were a reliable source of carbohydrates in a world where grain crops could often fail. They would be harvested in the autumn, a communal activity for the whole village. They could be dried and ground into a flour to make bread, cakes and polenta. They could be roasted over a fire, their sweet, nutty aroma filling the chilly autumn air. The chestnut groves were a kind of halfway house between the wild forest and the cultivated farm. They were managed, but they were still part of the woodland ecosystem. And of course there is the mighty oak, the quercus. Several species would be present, each adapted to slightly different conditions. The oak is a symbol of endurance. Its bark is rough, craggy, and deeply fissured, a testament to its long life. Its branches are not straight and aspiring like the fir, but gnarled and spreading, twisting into fantastic shapes as if wrestling with the wind. The oak is a generous tree. Its acorns, produced in abundance in a mast year, are a vital food source for so many of the forest's inhabitants. Wild boar will gorge on them to fatten up for the winter. Jays will bury them, acting as unwitting foresters by planting new oak trees. For the medieval peasant, the oak was also a source of wealth. Droves of domestic pigs would be led into the oak woods in autumn for what was called pannage, the right to let them fatten up on the fallen acorns. Oak wood itself is incredibly strong and durable, prized for construction, and the bark is rich in tannins which were essential for tanning leather. The oak was a tree of power, both practical and mystical, often associated with ancient pagan deities even long after the arrival of Christianity. This canopy is not a peaceful place. It is a slow-motion battle for light, fought over decades and centuries. A young sapling on the forest floor may wait for 100 years in the deep shade, growing only inches, waiting for one of the old giants to fall. When a great tree is brought down by a lightning strike or a winter gale, it is a momentous event. A hole is torn in the fabric of the canopy. For the first time in centuries, direct sunlight hits the forest floor in that spot, and then the race begins. The waiting saplings, suddenly energized by the influx of light, surge upwards, competing with each other to be the one to fill the gap and claim a place in the sun. It is a silent, ruthless, and patient struggle for dominance that shapes the very architecture of the forest. Now let us descend from the airy world of the canopy and into the middle layer of our vertical city, the understory. This is the realm of shrubs and smaller trees, the life that exists in the dappled twilight beneath the great ones. This layer is crucial. It is the connective tissue of the forest. Here you will find hazel, Corylus avellana. Its thin, flexible stems grow in clumps, creating dense thickets. In late winter, long before the beeches and oaks have even thought of waking up, the hazel produces its flowers. Long, yellow, pollen-laden catkins, the male flowers, hang like lamb's tails, dancing in the breeze and releasing clouds of golden dust. The female flowers are tiny, bud-like structures with a brilliant red tuft of styles, almost invisible unless you know what to look for. The nuts they produce in autumn are a treasure, food for squirrels, dormice, and humans alike. The wood of the hazel is pliable and was endlessly useful for weaving into fences and baskets, for the frames of simple houses, and as sturdy walking sticks for those journeying through the woods. You would also find hawthorn, Crataegus monogina, the thorn apple tree. It is a defensive, spiky shrub, its branches armed with sharp thorns. In May, it covers itself in a blizzard of creamy white, sweetly scented blossoms, a feast for bees and other insects. In autumn, it is decorated with clusters of deep red berries called haws. These are a vital winter food source for birds like thrushes and blackbirds. The hawthorn often grows at the edges of the forest, or in clearings, acting as a natural, impenetrable fence. It was a tree steeped in folklore, often seen as a gateway to the other world, a place of fairies and spirits. To cut down a lone hawthorn was considered terribly bad luck. And then there is holly, Ilex equifolium. With its dark, glossy, evergreen leaves and spiny edges, it provides a splash of green and a sense of shelter in the bare winter woods. The waxy leaves are a clever adaptation, preventing water loss. Interestingly, on older holly trees, the leaves higher up, out of reach of browsing deer, often have smooth edges without the spines. The tree, it seems, doesn't waste energy on defenses where they are not needed. In winter, the female trees are adorned with brilliant scarlet berries, another crucial food source for birds when all else is frozen or bare. The berries are poisonous to humans, a fact well known to any forager. Holly was another plant of deep symbolic importance, a symbol of life and protection in the dead of winter, a remnant of pagan traditions that was eventually absorbed into Christian Christmas celebrations. This understory layer is the nursery and the larder of the forest. It provides shelter for nesting birds, a safe haven from predators in the sky. It's a hiding place for young deer. Its flowers provide nectar for insects, and its berries and nuts feed a huge array of creatures. It breaks up the fall of rain so that the water drips more gently onto the forest floor, preventing soil erosion. It creates a humid, sheltered microclimate, a world away from the wind and sun of the open country. Now, let us crouch down and look even closer, at the ground beneath our feet. We have reached the forest floor, the ground level of our woodland city. At first it might seem simple, a carpet of dead leaves, a few ferns, some mossy rocks. But this is arguably the most complex and important layer of all. This is where the great cycle of life and death, of decay and rebirth, is most visible. The floor is covered by a thick layer of leaf litter, technically known as duff. It is a multi-generational blanket of fallen leaves, twigs, nuts, and other organic debris. The top layer is fresh, The leaves from the previous autumn still recognizable in their shape and color, rustling when you walk on them. Dig down a little with your fingers. The leaves below are darker, fragmented and damp. They are in the process of being broken down. They have lost their crispness and are becoming part of the soil. Dig deeper still, and you reach a layer of rich, dark, crumbly material that smells earthy and sweet. This is humus, the final product of decomposition. It is the very essence of fertility, a storehouse of nutrients that will be drawn up by the roots of the trees to fuel new growth in the canopy above. This process of decay is not passive. It is driven by an invisible, unthinkably vast army of decomposers. To call them the forest's cleanup crew would be an understatement. They are the recycling plant, the engine of nutrient cycling. If you were to pick up a single handful of this rich forest soil, you would be holding more living organisms than there are humans on the entire planet. Let's imagine we could shrink down to their size. We would find ourselves in a labyrinth of tunnels and pores, a subterranean world of incredible complexity. We would see earthworms, the great engineers of the soil, burrowing through the earth, aerating it, mixing the layers, and digesting organic matter in their gut, excreting it as nutrient-rich casts. We would encounter wood lice, like tiny armored tanks, methodically chewing on decaying wood. We would see swift, predatory centipedes hunting smaller creatures in the darkness, and slow, peaceful millipedes grazing on rotting leaves. There are springtails, tiny insect-like creatures that can leap great distances when disturbed, and mites of 1,000 different species, each with its own specialized role. And this is to say nothing of the microscopic life, the bacteria and protozoa and nematodes, a universe of life in every gram of soil. They are the true foundation of the forest. Without this tireless, silent work of decomposition, the entire ecosystem would grind to a halt, choked by its own waste, its nutrients locked up in dead matter. Growing up from this rich soil is the herb layer. This is the world of the non-woody plants, the wild flowers and ferns that have to adapt to the low-light conditions. Many of them are spring ephemerals. They have a very clever strategy. They burst into life in the early spring, before the great deciduous trees above have grown their leaves. For a few precious weeks, the forest floor is bathed in sunlight. In this short window, plants like wood anemones, with their delicate white, star-like flowers, will carpet the ground. Wild garlic, or ramsons, will produce a sea of broad green leaves and white flowers, filling the air with their pungent, oniony scent. Violets and primroses add splashes of purple and yellow. These plants have to grow, flower, and set seed all before the canopy closes over and plunges their world back into deep shade for the summer. Then they die back, their energy stored in bulbs or rhizomes underground, waiting patiently for the following spring. Ferns, on the other hand, are masters of the shade. Their complex, feathery leaves, called fronds, are brilliant at capturing the faint, dappled light that filters through the canopy. In spring, you can see their new fronds unfurling from tight coils called crosiers or fiddleheads, a perfect spiral of new life. They give the forest floor a lush, prehistoric feel, a sense of timelessness. And now we must go deeper. Beneath the leaf litter, beneath the soil teeming with microscopic life, lies the most secret and perhaps the most wondrous part of the forest. It is a hidden kingdom that connects almost everything. This is the mycelial network. When we see a mushroom pushing up through the leaf litter, we are only seeing its fruit. The main body of the organism, the fungus itself, is a vast, sprawling network of incredibly fine thread-like structures called hyphae. A mass of these hyphae is called a mycelium. It spreads through the soil and the decaying wood, a living web of immense size and complexity. A single fungal organism can cover many acres and be thousands of years old, making it one of the largest and oldest living things on Earth. This network is not just passively existing in the soil. It is in a deeply intimate and ancient partnership with the trees. The vast majority of trees in this forest, and indeed in the world, have their roots physically connected to this fungal network. This symbiotic relationship is called mycorrhiza, which literally means fungus root. It is one of the most important relationships on the planet. Here's how this beautiful partnership works. The tree, through photosynthesis in its leaves, creates sugars, an abundance of energy-rich carbon. It sends a significant portion of this sugar, sometimes up to a third of its total production, down through its trunk and into its roots where it feeds the fungus. The fungus cannot produce its own food, so it is utterly dependent on the tree for this energy. In return, the fungus provides the tree with something it desperately needs but struggles to acquire on its own: water and mineral nutrients from the soil. The fungal hyphae are vastly finer and more extensive than any tree rootlet. They can penetrate tiny pores in the soil and rock that roots cannot, unlocking access to vital nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. The mycelial network is, in effect, a massive extension of the tree's own root system, increasing its surface area for absorption by hundreds or even thousands of times. Think of it as nature's own quiet, underground internet. The trees are the great hubs, the data centers, and the mycelial network is the fiber optic cabling that connects them all. And this connection is not just between a single tree and a single fungus. The network is communal. A single large old tree, a mother tree, might be connected to hundreds of other trees around it, both of its own species and others. Through this shared network, it can pass resources back and forth. A mother tree in a sunny spot might send excess sugars through the network to younger saplings struggling in the deep shade, nurturing the next generation. Trees can use the network to send chemical warning signals to each other. If one tree is attacked by a plague of insects, it can release chemical signals that travel through the mycelium and alert its neighbors, who can then preemptively ramp up their own chemical defenses before the insects even arrive. It is a system of cooperation, of communication, of resource sharing that is breathtaking in its complexity. It completely upends our old idea of a forest as a collection of individual trees competing for survival. The forest is not a collection of individuals. It is a true superorganism, a connected, communicating whole, bound together by this silent, invisible, intelligent web. The fruiting bodies of this network, the mushrooms, are themselves a source of wonder, food and fear for the medieval people of this forest. There would be the noble porcino, Boletus edulis, a chunky, delicious mushroom prized by foragers with a nutty, earthy flavor. Finding a patch of porcini would be a cause for celebration. Then there are the flamboyant, jewel-like mushrooms, like the fly agaric, Amanita muscaria, with its brilliant red cap and white spots. It's the classic fairy tale toadstool, beautiful but poisonous and hallucinogenic, a mushroom steeped in shamanic folklore and otherworldly power. To the medieval mind, its sudden appearance from the earth overnight was a sign of magic, of the uncanny forces at work in the woods. And deepest of all, the most prized and mysterious treasure of the Italian forest, the truffle. The truffle is the fruiting body of a fungus that lives its entire life underground, in a mycorrhizal relationship with the roots of oak and hazel trees. It never sees the light of day. Its potent, musky, intoxicating aroma is designed to attract animals like wild boar and badgers, who will dig it up, eat it, and then spread its spores through their droppings, allowing the fungus to reproduce. Humans, with their poor sense of smell, learned to co-opt this process, using the sensitive noses of pigs or, later, trained dogs to locate these hidden black diamonds. The truffle was a thing of mystery and luxury, a taste of the deep, dark, secret earth itself. Now that we have explored the architecture of the forest, from its highest canopy to its deepest roots, let us walk quietly through it and observe its citizens, the fauna who call this complex world their home. Life here moves to different rhythms, often hidden from human eyes. As dusk begins to fall, the forest changes. The daytime birds fall silent, and a new set of sounds begins. A twig snaps in the undergrowth. You freeze and listen. A low grunting sound, the noise of a powerful animal moving through the thicket. It is a family of wild boar, Sus groffa. The matriarch, a large sow with a formidable bristly hide, leads her young striped piglets. They are the plows of the forest. They use their tough cartilaginous snouts to root and dig in the forest floor, turning over the leaf litter and soil in search of acorns, chestnuts, roots, worms, and fungi. This activity, which can look destructive, is actually vital. It aerates the soil and helps to create seedbeds for new plants to germinate. The boar is a creature of immense strength and a fiery temperament if cornered, a symbol of the untamed, dangerous power of the wilderness. Moving with far more grace, almost like a phantom, is the roe deer, Capreolus capreolus. They are creatures of the edge, of the twilight hours of dawn and dusk. You might catch a glimpse of one, a flash of its reddish-brown coat and its white rump patch, before it melts back into the shadows. Their movements are silent, their senses incredibly acute. They browse on the leaves of shrubs and low-hanging branches, their delicate feeding habits shaping the structure of the understory. And hunting these animals is the apex predator of the Apennine forest, the wolf. The Italian wolf, Canis lupus italicus, is a subspecies perfectly adapted to this mountain environment. In the medieval world, the wolf was the embodiment of fear. It was a real threat to the livestock, the sheep and goats that were a peasant's entire wealth. It was a creature of the night, its howl a chilling sound that would echo through the valleys, a reminder of the ever-present danger that lay just beyond the village walls. But from an ecological perspective, the wolf is not a monster. It is a keystone species, the master regulator of the entire system. By preying on the deer and the boar, they keep the herbivore populations in check, preventing them from overgrazing and destroying the vegetation. They cull the weak, the sick, and the old, ensuring that the prey herds remain strong and healthy. The presence of the wolf is a sign of a complete, functioning, and truly wild ecosystem. They are the guardians of the forest's health. Look up into the branches. You might see a red squirrel, a creature of pure nervous energy, leaping with incredible agility from branch to branch, its bushy tail acting as a rudder and a parachute. In the hollow of an old oak, a family of dormice might be curled up, hibernating through the colder months, their heartbeats slowed to an almost imperceptible flutter. On the forest floor, a badger, a powerful nocturnal digger, might emerge from its ancient set, a complex multi-generational network of underground tunnels to forage for earthworms and grubs. The bird life, too, is rich and varied. The constant, rhythmic drumming you hear is a woodpecker, probably the great spotted woodpecker, hammering its beak against a dead tree trunk. It is not an act of random destruction. The bird is excavating for beetle larvae living under the bark, and in the process, it creates nesting cavities that will later be used by other birds, like nuthatches and owls. The call of the cuckoo in spring, a simple two-note song, is a classic sound of the European woodland, a harbinger of warmer days to come. And at night, the forest belongs to the owls. The deep, resonant hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo of a tawny owl is a sound that is both comforting and deeply mysterious. They are silent hunters, their specialized feathers allowing them to fly without a whisper of sound, their huge eyes able to see in the dimmest starlight, their sharp talons ready to snatch a mouse rustling in the leaves below. For the medieval person, this forest was their world. It was a place of deep ambiguity, a source of both life and death. It was their supermarket, their hardware store, and their pharmacy. From the forest came the wood that built their homes and cooked their food. From it came the meat, the deer, the boar, the birds that supplemented their meager diet. It provided nuts, berries, and mushrooms, a harvest for those who knew where and when to look. The leaves of certain plants could be used to make medicinal teas, the bark of others to treat fevers. The forest was an essential provider, a place of sustenance. But it was also a place of profound danger. The most obvious danger was getting lost. In a vast, dense, trackless woodland, it was terrifyingly easy to lose your way. There were no signposts, no landmarks that stood out in the homogeneous sea of trees. To be lost in the woods, especially as night fell, was to be utterly vulnerable. The temperature would drop. The familiar sounds would be replaced by strange, unsettling noises, and the predators, the wolf and the bear, were most active at night. Every snapping twig, Every rustle in the undergrowth would feed the fear. This physical danger was mirrored by a spiritual one. The forest was seen as a liminal space, a place outside the bounds of human law and Christian society. The village and the walled town were places of order, community, and the comforting rituals of the church. The forest was the opposite. It was a place of chaos, solitude, and pagan memory. The old gods of the Romans and the nature spirits of even older beliefs had never fully disappeared. They had simply retreated into the deep woods. They were believed to live on as folkloric figures, spirits of the trees and streams. A medieval peasant might still leave a small offering at the base of an ancient oak, a gesture to appease the old powers, just in case. The church, for its part, often recast these old spirits as demons and devils, making the forest a place of spiritual peril, a place where a good Christian might be led into temptation and sin. The forest was, therefore, a moral landscape as much as a physical one. To enter the woods was to leave the straight path, the diretta via of righteous society, and risk losing your way in every sense of the word. It was a place of testing, a place where the boundaries between the real and the supernatural, between good and evil, became blurred. It was wild, it was dark, it was easy to get lost in, and it was full of hidden dangers, both real and imagined. And so we arrive back where we started, with a man in the middle of his life's journey, finding himself lost in just such a forest. The selva oscura that opens Dante's Inferno was not some fantastical invention. It was a reflection of a real, tangible and powerful feature of the medieval Italian world. It was a place that every single one of his readers would have understood intimately. They knew the feel of the cool air under the canopy, the sound of the wind in the high branches, the fear of the coming night in a place where the path had disappeared. Dante took this shared physical reality, the rewilded, haunted, and deeply ambiguous forest of his time, and transformed it into the perfect metaphor for a soul lost in sin and confusion, standing at the beginning of a long and arduous journey towards the light. The primeval canopy was not just the setting for his story, it was the fertile, dark soil from which the entire epic grew. Chapter 2: The Dark Wood of Error, Dante's Poetic Wilderness. And so we leave the physical forest, the deep, damp soil, and the ancient canopy of medieval Italy, but we do not travel far, because the most fertile soil of all, the darkest and richest earth for growing a story, is the human mind itself. The epic did not just grow from the soil of that time, it grew within the mind of a man who felt as lost and tangled as any traveller in the most forbidding wilderness. He took the real physical sensation of being lost, the rising panic, the chill, the disorienting gloom, and he turned it inward, creating a landscape that was entirely metaphorical, yet more real to him than the ground beneath his feet. This is the true setting for the beginning of his journey, the selva oscura, the dark wood. It is not a place you can find on a map, it is a place you can only find within yourself. To understand this forest of the soul, we must first understand the man who found himself wandering there. Dante Alighieri was not born a poet of the underworld. He was a citizen, a politician, a soldier, a man deeply, passionately in love with his city, Florence. Imagine a place of dazzling new wealth and intellectual fire, a city building its future in marble and gold, a place humming with the energy of commerce, art, and fierce debate. This was Dante's world. He was a part of its machinery, a man of public standing, a civic leader who believed in the promise of his city, in its potential for justice and glory. He believed there was a correct path, a straight way, not just for a soul, but for a city, for a society. It was a path of moral integrity, civic duty, and righteous governance, and for a time he walked it. The journey of a life, in his world, was not seen as a meandering exploration. It was a pilgrimage with a clear destination. Life had a structure, a divinely ordained architecture. You were born, you were baptized, you served your family, your city, and your God, and you aimed for salvation. The path was straight. La diritta via, the straight way. The phrase itself is so simple, so full of a powerful, uncomplicated certainty. It's the road home. It's the way things are supposed to be. The horror of the Divine Comedy begins not with fire or demons, but with the quiet, devastating admission that this path, the most important thing in a person's existence, has been lost. He opens his epic with lines that have echoed for 7 centuries, lines of such profound and weary honesty. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a dark wood, for the straight way had been lost. Let's just rest with that for a moment. Midway upon the journey of our life. In the year 1300, when the poem is set, Dante was 35 years old. The biblical lifespan was 70 years, so 35 was the precise middle, the crest of the hill. It's the moment you have enough past behind you to be weighed down by regret, and just enough future ahead to be terrified of where you're going. It is the high noon of a life, a time that should be filled with the most clarity and strength. But for Dante, this moment of peak vitality is a moment of absolute blindness. He is not a young man making foolish mistakes, nor an old man fading into senility. He is a man in the fullness of his powers, who has come to a dead stop, realizing he has no idea where he is or how he got there. And notice his phrasing. I found myself within a dark wood. It is a passive statement. It suggests a slow, imperceptible drift. He didn't stride boldly into the woods on an adventure. He didn't make a single catastrophic wrong turn. It was 1,000 small compromises, a series of tiny, almost invisible deviations from the path, a spiritual sleepwalking that led him, step by unconscious step, into the tangled heart of the forest. He says he was full of sleep at that point when I abandoned the true way. Think of that feeling when you're driving a familiar road late at night and you suddenly realize you don't remember the last few miles. There is a chill in that moment of waking up, the realization that you have been moving without awareness, without intention. For Dante, this was not a journey of miles, but of the soul. He had been asleep at the wheel of his own life. This forest, this selva oscura, is therefore the perfect metaphor for a state of sin and confusion. A forest is not an evil place, but it is a place without clear paths. Every direction looks the same. The canopy blots out the sun, the ultimate symbol of God's reason and grace, leaving you in a disorienting twilight. The undergrowth snags at your clothes, holding you back, tripping you up, just as small habits and worldly attachments impede spiritual progress. The sounds are ambiguous. A snapping twig could be an animal, or just the wind. It is a place of uncertainty, and for a medieval mind, uncertainty was a form of terror. It was the absence of God's clear order. To truly feel the suffocating density of this wood, we have to understand the political storm that was raging outside the poem. In Dante's own life, his personal forest was cultivated by the bitter, internecine politics of 14th century Florence. The city was torn apart by a conflict that seems impossibly distant to us now, but for him it was everything. It was the feud between two factions, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. Originally, it was a struggle between those who supported the Pope's authority, the Guelphs, and those who supported the Holy Roman Emperor's authority, the Ghibellines. But over time, it became less a matter of grand principle and more like a blood feud, a cycle of vengeance and violence that infected every aspect of Florentine life. It was a kind of political autoimmune disease, where the city was relentlessly attacking itself. Dante was a Guelph, but Florence, in its endless capacity for division, couldn't be content with just one schism. The victorious Guelphs soon split into two new factions, the Black Guelphs and the White Guelphs. The Blacks were more radical, uncompromising in their support for the Pope, while the Whites, Dante's party, sought to maintain Florence's independence and were wary of papal overreach. Dante rose to a position of great influence as one of the priors of Florence, a leading magistrate. He was, for a time, at the very center of power, trying to navigate this impossible labyrinth to find a straight path for his beloved city. He tried to be fair. He even made the difficult decision to exile leaders from both factions, including his own close friend, in an attempt to quell the violence. But fairness is often the first casualty in a civil war. In 1301, while Dante was on a diplomatic mission to Rome, the Black Guelphs, with the backing of the Pope and a French prince, seized control of Florence. The trap had been sprung. And then came the sentence. Dante Alighieri, and hundreds of others from his party, were condemned in absentia. The charges were false, corruption, embezzlement, the standard political smears of the day. His punishment was twofold. First, exile. He was banished from the city he loved, the city that was, in a very real sense, his entire world. In the 14th century, your identity was not internal, it was external. It was your family, your name, your trade, and above all, your city. To be exiled was to be stripped of your identity, to be made a non-person. It was a civic death. The second part of the sentence was that if he were ever to return to Florence, he would be burned at the stake. This is the moment Dante enters the dark wood. It is not just a midlife crisis, it is a complete and total devastation of a life. He has lost his home, his property, his status, his political cause, his friends, his very identity as a Florentine. The straight way was the life he had been building, the future he had envisioned for himself and his city. And in an instant it was gone, obliterated. He was now a wanderer, dependent on the charity of patrons, tasting, as he would later write, how salt the bread of others tastes, and how hard a path it is to go up and down another's stairs. This exile is the bitter, personal heart of the Inferno. The dark wood is the wilderness of the outcast. It's the state of waking up in the morning and having no purpose, no home to return to, no community that claims you. The tangled trees and the lost path are a perfect representation of his own future. Which way should he turn? What cause should he fight for? Who could he trust? The political landscape was as treacherous and confusing as any primeval forest. All the old landmarks were gone. He was, in the most profound sense, lost. But Dante was not just a politician. He was a scholar of immense learning. And as he wandered in his own personal wilderness, he was not entirely alone. His mind was populated with the great stories and figures of the past. He knew that the wilderness was a powerful and ancient symbol in the literary traditions he revered. He was entering a landscape that had been mapped before. He looked back to his greatest guide, the Roman poet Virgil. In Virgil's masterpiece, the Aeneid, the hero Aeneas must journey into the underworld, a dark and terrifying realm, to speak with the ghost of his father and learn the future of his people. The entrance to this underworld is a dark forest, a place of shadow and fear. Dante saw himself as a new Aeneas, a man on a mission of world historical importance, but he felt unequal to the task. He was lost in his own dark wood, and he needed a guide. And so, in the poem, he summons the spirit of Virgil himself to lead him. It's a choice of profound humility and literary genius. Virgil, the poet of the Roman Empire, represents the peak of human reason, the best that humanity can achieve on its own. For Dante, reason is the first lantern you must light when you find yourself in the dark. It can't take you all the way to paradise, but it can get you through the pits of hell. He also drew on an even deeper tradition, the biblical wilderness. The desert, the forest, the wasteland in the Bible, these are not just empty places. They are places of spiritual testing and transformation. Moses and the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, a period of purification before they could enter the promised land. The prophets, like Elijah, went into the wilderness to escape corruption and hear the voice of God. And most importantly, Christ himself was driven into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights to be tempted by Satan. It is the archetypal setting for the confrontation with one's own weakness, one's own demons. By placing his own personal and political crisis in a selva oscura, Dante is doing something audacious. He is elevating his own story to the level of these epic and sacred journeys. He is suggesting that his exile from Florence is not just a political misfortune, it is a spiritual trial of universal significance. The journey he is about to undertake is not just for himself, but for everyone. Remember the first line, midway upon the journey of our life, not my life. From the very beginning, he makes his personal catastrophe a universal one. He is our representative, the everyman who is lost, and he invites us, his readers, to walk alongside him, to recognize the dark woods in our own lives. So let's step into this wood with him. Let's try to feel what he feels. The first thing is the loss of the sun. He looks up towards a hill, and he can see its shoulders clothed in the light of the planet that leads men straight on every road. That light is hope. It's grace. It's the possibility of finding the path again. For a moment his heart calms. He has a destination. All he has to do is climb. But the forest will not let him go so easily. The path up the hill is not clear, and as he begins to ascend, his way is blocked, not by trees or rocks, but by 3 beasts, which emerge from the gloom one by one. These are not just animals. They are living embodiments of the sins that have led him into this wood and that now prevent him from leaving. They are the guardians of his prison. The first is a leopard, Alonza. It is beautiful, swift, and covered in a spotted hide. It is so nimble and alluring that Dante is almost tempted to turn back. This leopard is often interpreted as lust, or, more broadly, fraud. Its beautiful dappled coat is the perfect image for deception. It is the sin that looks attractive, the lie that seems harmless, the shortcut that seems clever. It is the politics of his day, full of shifting allegiances and beautiful promises that hide a predatory nature. It doesn't attack him with brute force, it simply dances before him, blocking his way, a constant, beautiful, and frustrating obstacle. He manages to find a way around it, but then a second, more terrifying creature appears. A lion, a leone. Its head is held high, and it comes at him with a rabid hunger, so terrifying that the very air seems to tremble. This is the sin of pride and violence. It's the brute force of ambition, the roar of the ego. This is the sin of the powerful men who tore Florence apart, the arrogance of those who believe their will is absolute. This is the violence that led to his exile. The lion does not need to be deceptive. Its power is open, overwhelming, and paralytic with fear. And just as he recoils from the lion, the third and most dreadful beast emerges. A she-wolf, a lupa. And here Dante's language becomes truly chilling. He describes her as a creature laden in her leanness with all cravings. She is a walking embodiment of insatiable desire. She is avarice, greed, incontinence, the uncontrolled appetites for money, for power, for worldly things. She is a spiritual black hole. What makes her so terrifying is that she is never satisfied. Her hunger is infinite. The more she eats, the hungrier she becomes. Of the 3 beasts, she is the one who truly breaks his spirit. The leopard blocked his way, the lion frightened him, but the she-wolf actively drives him back. Step by step, she forces him down the hill, back into the darkness, there where the sun is silent. Think of that phrase, dove ul, where the sun is silent, not just where the sun doesn't shine, but where it is silent. It's a synesthetic masterpiece. The light of God, the voice of reason and hope, has been utterly extinguished. This is the feeling of absolute despair. It's the moment you stop fighting and give in to the darkness. The she-wolf is the part of us that says, it's no use, you can't change, the world is corrupt, just give in and take what you can get. She is the embodiment of hopelessness, and it is here, at this moment of total defeat, when he is ruining down into the low place, that a figure finally appears. It is a voice, a presence in the silent wood. It is his guide. It is Virgil. The dark wood, then, is more than just a setting. It is a complete psychological and spiritual diagnosis. It is the state of the soul before grace. It is the world without a guide. Dante had to create this space, had to describe its terrors and its traps with such precision, because you cannot begin a journey to the light without first understanding the exact nature of the darkness you are in. You cannot find the cure until you have diagnosed the disease. The disease was his own sin, the sin of his city, the sin of his age. The symptoms were the tangled paths, the disorienting gloom, and the 3 beasts that lurk in the undergrowth of every human heart. He is not yet in hell, he is in the antechamber. The selva oscura is the natural earthly consequence of losing the straight way. It is the life lived without divine guidance, a life governed by fear, confusion, and unchecked appetite. It is a kind of spiritual quarantine. Before he can see the punishments for sin in the Inferno, he must first experience the state of sin itself in the lonely, terrifying wilderness of his own heart. So let us stay here with him for just a little longer. In the quiet of this place, feel the oppressive weight of the canopy overhead, blotting out the stars. Listen to the silence where the sun should be. See the faint, ghostly shapes of the three beasts, forever circling, forever blocking the path to the sunlit hill. This is not a place of fire and screaming. It is a place of profound and chilling stillness. It is the quiet paralysis of a soul that has lost its way. It is the necessary starting point. It is the moment of realizing you are lost, the terrifying and essential first step on the long journey back home. Chapter 3, Canto XIII, The Wood of the Suicides. And so we take that first step. We move forward from that place of dark stillness, that profound and terrifying realization of being lost. The ground beneath our feet begins to change. The firm, dry earth of the forest floor gives way to something softer, something yielding. It becomes a thick, clinging mud, dark and rich with the smell of salt and decay. But it is not the smell of death. It is the smell of life, but a different kind of life, one that operates by a different set of rules. The air grows heavy, humid, tasting of the sea. And as our eyes adjust, we see that the familiar trees have vanished. In their place stands a forest of such strangeness that it seems born from a dream. These are not trees that aspire to the sky with straight, noble trunks. These are trees that seem to be wrestling with the very ground they stand on. They are a tangled, chaotic assembly of knotted limbs and exposed, arching roots. They stand on stilts, holding their trunks aloft, as if in fear of touching the black soil. It is a wood of gnarled, twisted forms, grey and thorny, where every branch seems to reach not upward in hope, but sideways in struggle, or downward in resignation. This is the landscape that inspired that old, dark poetry. This is nature's own wood of the suicides, but we must look closer. We must quiet the part of our mind that sees only sorrow in these twisted shapes, and awaken the part that can see genius. This is not a place of punishment. This is a place of impossible survival. This is a mangrove forest. Look at the roots. In a normal tree, the roots are a hidden affair, a private foundation buried deep beneath the earth. But here, they are on full display, a magnificent and sprawling work of architecture. These are the prop roots of the red mangrove, Rhizophora mangle. They arc down from the trunk and the lower branches, like the flying buttresses of a great cathedral, plunging into the soft, unstable mud. They are not merely holding the tree up, they are creating the ground itself. Each root is a pioneer. As it anchors itself, it slows the gentle movement of the water, causing sediment, silt, and fallen leaves to settle around it. Slowly, patiently, grain by grain, the mangrove builds its own island, its own world. It is a tree that is not just a resident of the land, it is a creator of it. You can see how they interlock, these roots. One tree's foundation becomes entangled with its neighbors, and that one with the next, until the entire forest is woven together into a single cohesive unit. It is less a collection of individual trees, and more one great sprawling organism, bound together beneath the mud. This is a community where the individual is secondary to the whole, a living city built on a foundation of its own making, strong enough to withstand the daily push and pull of the ocean tides and the fury of coastal storms. It is a fortress of limbs, and here and there, poking up from the mud, like a field of strange blunt pencils, are the pneumatophores. These are the snorkels of the black mangrove, Avicennia germinans. The mud here is anoxic, which is a scientific way of saying it cannot breathe. It is so waterlogged, so dense with decaying matter, that there is no oxygen available for a normal root system. Most plants would suffocate in minutes, their roots starving for air, but the mangrove is a brilliant patient engineer. It doesn't try to find air in the soil, it reaches for it in the sky. These knobby knees, these strange vertical projections, are extensions of the root system that rise above the waterline. They are covered in tiny pores called lenticels, and through them the submerged root system can draw in the oxygen it needs to survive. Each one is a breath. Each one is a quiet testament to life's refusal to surrender, even in the most suffocating of circumstances. What looks to us like a field of thorns, a tortured landscape, is in fact a forest holding its breath and then breathing. Now let us turn our attention to the trees themselves, these beings that inspired the tale of souls trapped in wood. In the old poem, when a branch is broken, it cries out and bleeds. A fanciful, horrific image, but like so much of our mythology, it is a distorted echo of a biological truth. Find a fallen branch or a place where the bark has been scraped away. You will see a deep, dark red staining the wood, a liquid that oozes like blood. This is not lifeblood in the way we understand it, but it is a defense. The water here is brackish, a mix of fresh and salt, and the mangrove has developed a complex filtration system in its roots to keep most of the salt out. But some of it gets through. To cope, the tree concentrates this excess salt into its older leaves, which it then sheds, like a ship jettisoning excess cargo. But the bleeding is something else. This is the work of tannins. Tannins are complex chemical compounds, and the mangrove is a master chemist. These are the same bitter molecules found in strong tea or red wine. In the living tree, they are a powerful defense. They make the wood and bark unpalatable to insects and boring animals. They are antimicrobial and antifungal, protecting the tree from infection in this damp, microbe-rich environment. It is a form of chemical warfare, waged silently and constantly. When the bark is broken, the tannins are exposed to the air, and they oxidize, turning that deep blood-red color. The tree is not screaming in pain. It is sealing a wound. It is protecting itself. The very thing that the poet saw as a symbol of eternal torment is in reality a symbol of resilience, a quiet act of self-preservation. And listen to the sounds of this place. The old stories tell of harpies, foul bird-like creatures with human faces, nesting in the thorny branches, shrieking and defiling the trees. What do we hear? There is a sudden guttural squawk from the canopy above, a great blue heron, perhaps, disturbed from its perch. There is the sharp, rattling cry of a belted kingfisher as it dives for a small fish in the shallow water. There is the constant, almost imperceptible clicking and scuttling in the mud below. That is the sound of 1,000 tiny crabs, like the mangrove tree crab, which lives its entire life in the branches, or the fiddler crabs, the males waving their one oversized claw in a silent, rhythmic ritual on the muddy stage below. These are the real harpies of this wood. They are not monsters. They are residents. They are partners. The birds nest in the high branches, finding safety from land-based predators in the tangled maze. Their droppings, rich in nitrogen, fertilize the mud, providing essential nutrients that are otherwise scarce. The crabs are the cleanup crew, feeding on the fallen leaves and other detritus, breaking down organic matter and returning it to the ecosystem. The fish and shrimp use the submerged root system as a nursery, a safe haven for their young to grow, protected from the larger predators of the open ocean. This is not a place of defilement. It is a place of profound and intricate connection. Every shriek, every click, every rustle is a note in a complex symphony. It is the sound of a healthy, thriving, and deeply interwoven community. And what of the punishment itself, the central, chilling concept of that canto? The idea of a soul denied its human form, trapped for eternity in the body of a gnarled tree. It is a profound theological statement on the nature of self-harm. But here, in the mangrove forest, we see a different, more beautiful interpretation of what it means to lose one's form. Look up into the branches of the red mangrove. You will see what look like long green beans hanging from the twigs. But these are not fruits or seeds in the way we normally think of them. This is one of nature's most remarkable reproductive strategies, known as vivipary. The seed does not fall from the tree to take its chances on the ground. Instead, it germinates while still attached to the parent branch. It grows a long, spear-like root, called a propagule, right there in the open air. For months it draws nutrients and energy from the parent tree, developing, maturing, preparing for its journey. It is a plant that gives birth to a living, growing seedling. The line between parent and child, between one generation and the next, is beautifully blurred. When the propagule is ready, it detaches. It might fall like a dart, plunging directly into the soft mud below to take root right beside its parent, or it might fall into the water of the outgoing tide and float away. It can survive for months at sea, carried by the ocean currents, a tiny living ship searching for a new shore. When it finally washes up on a suitable mudflat, perhaps miles away, it is ready to grow immediately. It is not a seed, it is a pioneer, a fully equipped colonist sent out to expand the boundaries of the forest. And in this we see the ultimate reframing of that old poetic idea. The individual form is not denied as a punishment, it is transcended for the good of the whole. A single mangrove tree is not the goal. The goal is the forest. The goal is the community. The goal is the creation of new land, new habitats, new life. The tree sacrifices the tidy boundary of itself to become something larger, a nursery, a fortress, a world builder. The medieval poet saw this landscape through a lens of sin and divine retribution. He saw contrapasso, the fitting punishment, where the twisted actions of a life were made manifest in a twisted, eternal form. The gnarled branches were the physical embodiment of a soul that had turned against itself. But standing here in the quiet, humid air of the real mangrove forest, we can see a different kind of fittingness. We see nature's contrapasso, which is not punishment, but adaptation. The environment is harsh. The soil is unstable, salty, and breathless. And so the tree must become a master of architecture, raising itself on stilts. The water is a constant threat of salt poisoning. And so the tree must become a master of chemistry, filtering, storing, and expelling the salt. The mud is a suffocating trap. And so the tree must develop its own snorkels, reaching for the air above. Every feature that seems strange, tormented, or unnatural to our eyes is in fact a perfect and elegant solution to an impossible problem. The punishment is the landscape, but the form is the salvation. This is not a wood of despair. It is a monument to tenacity. The trees are not screaming. They are engineering. The birds are not demons. They are partners. The bleeding bark is not a cry of pain. It is a shield. And the loss of the individual form is not a curse. It is the birth of a community so strong that it can literally hold back the sea. Let your breathing slow down now and sink with the gentle rhythm of the tides that nourish this place. Feel the immense quiet strength in these interwoven roots. This forest teaches us that the most challenging, the most difficult environments can give rise to the most ingenious and beautiful forms of life. It teaches us that what appears to be a struggle from the outside can be a dance of perfect balance from within. And it reminds us that even in the darkest, most tangled of woods, there is not damnation, but a deep, resilient and life-affirming wisdom if we only have the patience to look and to listen. It is not the end of a journey, but the heart of one. It is not a prison for the soul, but a cradle for life itself. Chapter 4. The Earthly Inferno. In search of Dante's real forest. But where was this cradle? Where on the solid earth was this tangled wood that was not a prison, but a home for a resilient and complex life? For a mind as precise as Dante Alighieri's, a man who mapped the afterlife with the obsessive detail of a surveyor, the dark wood of his journey's beginning could not have been a purely abstract concept. It must have had an anchor in the world he knew. A memory etched by mud and thorn and the oppressive weight of a humid summer sky. A real place whose character was so profound, so deeply and terribly alive that it could serve as the blueprint for damnation itself. And so our journey now changes. We leave the allegorical forest, the symbol, and we begin to walk, in our minds, through the physical landscapes of 14th century Italy. We become historical detectives, ecological investigators, searching for the ghost of a forest that haunted one of literature's greatest imaginations. We are in search of the earthly Inferno. Our search begins in a place whose very name, for centuries, was a whispered warning, the Maremma. Stretching along the coast of Tuscany, it was, in Dante's time, a wild and forgotten land. It was not a forest in the way we might imagine one today, not a tranquil park of towering friendly trees. The Maremma was a sprawling, half-drowned world, a chaotic mosaic of brackish swamps, impenetrable thickets, and coastal dunes that shifted with the winds like sleeping beasts. To enter it was not to go for a pleasant walk, it was to risk disappearing altogether. Let's try to feel what it was like. Imagine standing at its edge in the 14th century. The air itself is different. It's thick, heavy with the moisture of the nearby sea and the decay of the swamplands. It carries a scent that is both alive and dead at the same time. The salty tang of the Tyrrhenian Sea, mixed with the sweet, cloying smell of stagnant water and rotting vegetation. And beneath it all, an earthy, fungal breath rising from the damp soil. This was the famous malaria, the bad air, which gave the region its most feared export, malaria. Before the understanding of the mosquito, this air itself was believed to be a poison, a visible miasma that rose from the swamps at dusk and brought with it a deadly fever. For a traveller, every sunset was a moment of quiet dread, a drawing of the blinds against an invisible foe. The soundscape of the Maremma would have been overwhelmingly alive, not with gentle birdsong but with a relentless buzzing drone, the sound of insects, in clouds so thick they could seem to shimmer in the heat, mosquitoes, horseflies, and 1,000 other biting, stinging creatures that thrived in the wetlands. This constant high-frequency hum would have been the auditory backdrop to every moment, a sound that gets under your skin, into your thoughts, a sound of ceaseless, hungry life. And beneath that hum, the rustle and crash of things unseen. The Maremma was the domain of the cinghiale, the wild boar. These were not farm pigs. They were formidable animals, bristling with coarse hair, armed with sharp tusks, and possessing a fierce, intelligent cunning. The sound of one crashing through the undergrowth would be sudden, violent, and terrifying. It was the sound of a land that did not belong to humans, a place where you were not the master but potential prey. Now let us turn our attention to the trees themselves, the very substance of Dante's hellish wood. When he describes the wood of the suicides in Canto XIII, he is uncannily specific. He writes of a place with no green leaves, but of a dark colour, no smooth boughs, but gnarled and contorted, no fruit was there, but thorns with poison. This is not a generic description of a spooky forest, it is a botanist's observation of the Maremman thicket. The dominant trees here were not tall, graceful pines, but stubborn, resilient holm oaks and cork oaks, trees that grow not so much upwards as outwards, their branches twisting and interlocking into a dense, almost solid canopy. Their leaves are not the bright, soft green of a maple or a birch. They are a deep, dark, waxy green, almost black in the shade, and they remain on the tree year-round, giving the forest a perpetually gloomy and unchanging character. The branches, as Dante notes, are gnarled and contorted, nodosi and volti. They are shaped by the constant struggle for light, by the salty sea winds, and by the sheer competition of the thicket. They reach and twist around each other, fusing together, creating a labyrinth of wood that seems to have been woven by a malevolent intelligence. And beneath these dark oaks, the true nightmare of the Maremma began. The undergrowth, a tangled, vicious mass of thorny shrubs, brambles, and wild asparagus vines, whose needle-like leaves were the thorns with poison Dante describes. To move through this was not to walk, but to fight. Every step was a negotiation with 1,000 tiny daggers that would rip at your clothes and your skin. Progress was measured in feet per hour, and it left you bleeding and exhausted. There were no clear paths, no friendly trails. The forest actively resisted you. It was a physical barrier, a fortress of vegetation. When Dante describes the souls of the suicides trapped within these trees, unable to move, their bodies transformed into the very substance of their prison, it's hard not to see the reflection of a traveller physically trapped, held fast by the grasping thorny arms of the Maraman scrub. This was a landscape shaped by water, but a frustrated, aimless water. The rivers that flowed from the Tuscan hills would slow to a crawl as they reached the flat coastal plain. They would spread out, losing their direction, creating vast shallow lagoons and swamps that festered under the Italian sun. This was not a world of clear, babbling brooks. It was a world of dark, still water, its surface coated in a green film of algae, its depths hiding tangled roots and the silent glide of water snakes. The ground beneath your feet would be an unreliable companion, firm one moment, and a deep sucking mud the next. It was a place that could swallow you whole. The Maremma was a landscape of outlaws, both human and natural. In the 14th century it was a frontier, a no-man's land between powerful city-states. It was a place where bandits and political exiles could hide, its impassable terrain a better defense than any castle wall. It was a place of wildness, not just in its ecology but in its human society. This resonates powerfully with the Wood of the Suicides, which is also a place of outcasts, souls who have rejected the laws of God and nature. The harpies that Dante places in the trees, these monstrous bird women who defile and torment the tree souls, feel like a perfect mythical embodiment of the Maremma's own spirit, wild, predatory and utterly alien to human order. They are the personification of a nature that is not nurturing but actively hostile. When the profligate sinners come crashing through the wood pursued by black hounds, it's an echo of the real boar hunts that would have torn through the thickets, a whirlwind of violence and terror in an already terrifying place. The Maremma was, in essence, a monument to decay. It was littered with the ghosts of a grander past. Along its coast were the ruins of ancient Etruscan cities, their stone walls and tombs slowly being consumed by the forest, their harbours silted up and turned to swampland. This was a powerful lesson for a medieval mind. It was visible proof that even the greatest works of man could be utterly erased by the slow, patient and relentless power of nature. The forest was not just a wild place, it was a conqueror. It grew over civilization, digested it, and turned it back into soil. For Dante, a man obsessed with the rise and fall of empires and the transience of earthly glory, this landscape would have been a profound and unsettling sermon written in stone and thorn. To walk there, even in the imagination, is to feel a sense of profound isolation. The dense canopy would block out the sky, creating a perpetual twilight. The air, thick and still, would muffle sound, creating an unnerving silence broken only by the buzz of insects or the sudden snap of a twig. It was a place that could disorient you in minutes, stripping away your sense of direction and your sense of self. It is the perfect physical correlative for the state of mind Dante describes at the beginning of the Inferno. I found myself within a dark wood, for the straight way was lost. In the Maremma, the straight way was not just lost, it had never existed. And yet we must remember the lesson from our last chapter. Even here, in this earthly inferno, there is not damnation but life, a brutal, competitive and magnificent life. The wild boars, the vipers, the raptors circling overhead, the dark-leaved oaks, the thorny vines, they are not evil, they are masters of survival. They are the inhabitants of a kingdom with its own ancient laws, laws that have nothing to do with human morality or comfort. The Maremma's terror is a human projection. For the life within it, it is simply home. It is a perfectly functioning, albeit harsh, ecosystem. It is a cradle for a different kind of life, a life that thrives on struggle. And perhaps Dante, in his genius, understood this. He chose this landscape not because it was dead, but because it was so terrifyingly, so chaotically alive. He took the most untamable piece of the real world he knew and made it the raw material for a supernatural prison. But Dante's exile was long. His journey took him across Italy, and in his final years he found refuge in a city that sat beside a very different kind of forest. A forest that may have inspired not the despair of hell, but the hope and gentle melancholy of purgatory. And so we must leave the dark, tangled thickets of Tuscany behind. We travel north and east, across the Apennine Mountains, to the city of Ravenna, on the coast of the Adriatic. And here, just outside the city walls, we find our second candidate, the Pineta di Classe. As we step into this forest, the change is immediate and profound. The oppressive weight of the Maremma is lifted. The air here is different. It's filled not with the smell of decay, but with the sharp, clean, resinous scent of pine. And mingling with it is the salt, sharp breeze coming in from the nearby sea. The light is transformed. The Pineta di Classe is not a forest of low, tangled oaks, but of stone pines, Pinus pinea. These are some of the most elegant and recognizable trees in the Mediterranean world. They grow tall, their lower branches falling away to leave a long, straight trunk, which then explodes into a magnificent umbrella-shaped canopy high above. The effect of a forest of these trees is architectural. It's like walking through a vast, living cathedral. The trunks are like pillars, and the high, flattened canopies form a ceiling that doesn't block the light, but filters it. The sunlight here doesn't struggle to get through. It pours through in shafts, dappling the forest floor in a constantly shifting mosaic of gold and green. The feeling is not one of being trapped, but of being sheltered. It is serene, orderly, and filled with a kind of gentle, breathing peace. The soundscape, too, is transformed. The threatening buzz of the Maraman swamps is replaced by a different set of sounds. High in the canopy, you hear the wind. It is a signature sound of the stone pine forest, a soft rushing sigh that is constant and soothing. It's the sound of the ocean, translated by the million-needled orchestra of the trees. Below, you hear the chirping, whirring thrum of cicadas, a sound so synonymous with the Mediterranean summer that it feels like the very sound of heat and sunlight made audible. And there is bird song. Dante, in his description of the earthly paradise in Canto XIII of Purgatorio, writes of a place where the birds sing with full joy. The Pineta, a coastal wetland, has always been a haven for birds, and its air would have been filled with their calls, a complex and beautiful symphony. This forest has a history as ancient and storied as the Maremmas, but of a different sort. Ravenna was once the capital of the Western Roman Empire, and Classe was its mighty port, a harbour that could hold 250 ships. The pine forest we see today stands on the land that was once that harbour. Over the centuries, the rivers carried silt down from the mountains, and the coastline slowly crept outwards, leaving the great port landlocked. The harbour became a marsh, and on the new land, this magnificent forest grew. So, like the Maremma, the Pineta di Classe is also a place where nature has reclaimed the works of man. But here, the result feels less like a violent conquest, and more like a gentle, beautiful transformation. The fall of an empire did not create a fearsome swamp, but a tranquil, divine-seeming wood. Dante spent the last years of his life here, walking under the patronage of Guido da Polenta, the Lord of Ravenna. It is almost certain that he would have walked in this very forest. It would have been his place of contemplation, a natural refuge from the political storms of his exile. And when we read his description of the earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden at the summit of Mount Purgatory, the echoes of the Pineta di Classe are unmistakable. He writes of a divine forest, thick and alive, and of a sweet breeze, without variation, that struck my brow with no more force than a gentle wind. This perfectly captures the feeling of the sea breeze as it moves through the pine canopy, its force broken, transformed into a steady, soft current of air. He describes a little stream, the river Lethe, whose waters are purer than any other. The Pineta is crisscrossed with small waterways and canals, remnants of the old lagoon, their slow-moving water catching the reflections of the tall pines. The forest floor here is not a treacherous tangle of thorns. It is a soft carpet of pine needles and grass, easy to walk upon. Dante describes the ground of his Eden as being full of flowers, and in the spring the clearings in the Pineta would have been bright with wildflowers. It is an approachable, human-scaled wilderness, a place for walking, for thinking, for healing. It is a landscape that encourages reflection, a gentle melancholy. It is a place of memory, built on the bones of a forgotten empire. Its beauty is tinged with the knowledge of loss and the passage of time. This is the very emotional key of purgatory. Purgatory is not a place of torment like hell, but of hopeful sorrow. It is a place where souls cleanse themselves through remembrance, where they look back on their earthly lives with a longing for redemption. The Pineta di Classe, with its serene sun-dappled beauty and its deep roots in a lost and grander past, is the perfect physical setting for this spiritual state. Imagine Dante walking here in the late afternoon. The sun is low, sending long golden rays horizontally through the pillared trunks of the pines. The air is cooling. The scent of pine resin is strong. He is an old man, an exile, far from his beloved Florence, a city he will never see again. His great poem is nearing its end. He is thinking about paradise, about redemption, about Beatrice, the love of his life whom he will soon encounter in his poetic Eden. This forest is his study, his church, his final comfort. The gentle sigh of the wind in the pines, the call of a distant bird, the rhythmic crash of the Adriatic waves just beyond the dunes, these are the sounds that accompany the final strokes of his pen. So we have two forests, two real physical places in Italy, both of which seem to have poured themselves into Dante's imagination. The Maremma, dark, chaotic, dangerous, impenetrable, a horizontal labyrinth of thorn and shadow, a perfect model for the punishments of hell. And the Pineta di Classe, orderly, serene, filled with light and gentle sound, a vertical aspiring forest of pillars and filtered sun, a perfect model for the hopeful ascent of purgatory. It shows us how a great artist works. They do not simply invent from nothing. They observe the world around them with an almost supernatural intensity. They absorb the character of a landscape, its light, its sounds, its smells, its very soul. They take the raw data of reality, the twisted branches of a holm oak, the umbrella canopy of a stone pine, the buzz of a mosquito, the song of a finch, and they transmute it. They give it moral and spiritual weight. They build worlds from it. The Maremma and the Pineta di Classe are not just geographical locations, they are repositories of feeling. One is a repository of fear, of disorientation, of the feeling of being physically and spiritually lost. The other is a repository of peace, of contemplation, of melancholy hope. Dante didn't need to invent a hellish wood or a purgatorial forest. He had seen them, he had walked in them, he had felt their power. Our journey to find Dante's real forest leads us to this beautiful conclusion. It was not one place, but two, and they represent the two poles of his vision, and perhaps the two poles of our own experience of the natural world. Nature can be terrifying. It can be a force that is hostile to our survival, a tangled and dangerous wilderness that reminds us of our fragility. That is the Maremma. But nature can also be a source of profound peace and spiritual solace. It can be a cathedral of living things that lifts our spirits and invites us to contemplate the beautiful order of the universe. That is the Pineta di Classe. And so, as we let our minds drift between these two Italian forests, we can appreciate the depth of the connection between our inner landscapes and the outer world. The Maremma still exists today, though much of it has been drained and tamed. The Pineta di Classe still stands, a protected park. You can still walk beneath its pines and smell the sea. They are no longer the wild, untamed places Dante knew, but their essential character remains. They are still powerful, evocative landscapes. They are living links to a 14th century imagination, tangible pieces of the world that were forged into an immortal poem. They remind us that the most fantastic creations of the human mind are often born from a deep, patient, and reverent observation of the real, breathing earth. The earthly Inferno and the earthly Paradise were there all along, waiting for a poet to walk among their trees and to write down what he saw. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Undergrowth, the legacy of a poetic hellscape. And what he wrote down became a seed, a single powerful seed of an idea planted in the fertile soil of the human imagination. And like any seed, it grew, it branched out, its roots digging deep into our culture, its limbs reaching through the centuries, leafing out in the minds of artists, poets and thinkers. But this legacy, this echo of a dark and twisted wood, does something else as well. It sends us back to the source. It encourages us to kneel down, to look closer at the real undergrowth, to see the very same patterns of struggle, of despair, of strange and sorrowful beauty that the poet first observed, still playing out, still echoing, in the quiet theatre of the natural world. The visions of painters like William Blake, with his ethereal, dreamlike figures caught in serpentine branches, or the stark, terrifying engravings of Gustave Doré, which for many have become the definitive visual record of the Inferno. These are not just illustrations of a poem. They are human attempts to capture a fundamental truth about nature. They are artistic translations of a biological language that we all, on some level, understand. They saw in Dante's words a reflection of the world they knew, a world where life is tenacious, bizarre, and often forged in profound hardship. And the most powerful symbol for this, the central character in this canto of despair, is the tree itself, a living thing, turned to wood, yet still capable of feeling. Let's begin there, with the echo of form. Let's consider the gnarled tree. Dante described trees that were knotted, black, and barren. He was describing a spiritual state, but he was borrowing the form from the real world. For a tree to become gnarled is not a matter of choice. It is a biography written in wood. It is the physical record of a long and difficult life. Think of the ancient bristlecone pines of the American West, clinging to windswept, nutrient-poor mountainsides. Some of these trees are among the oldest living organisms on Earth, individuals that were already ancient when Dante was a boy. To call them old is a polite understatement. They are living fragments of deep time. Their forms are a direct result of their struggle. The wind, a constant abrasive force at high altitudes, sculpts them. It strips away bark on one side, polishing the exposed wood to a silvery sheen, while forcing the tree to grow away from its path, creating deep, dramatic curves in the trunk. The branches are not the straight, aspiring limbs of a forest pine. They are twisted, contorted, reaching in on themselves, like muscles tensed against an eternal pressure. Every inch of their form is a story of survival. The bark is thick and resinous, a rugged armor against insects and fire. The wood is incredibly dense, a fortress against decay. They grow with an almost geological slowness, sometimes adding less than an inch of girth in a century. This is nature's frugal architecture, conserving every last resource in a place where resources are impossibly scarce. They are not dying, they are persevering in a state that to our eyes looks like perpetual agony. And when you stand before one, you feel it. You feel the weight of centuries. It is the physical embodiment of endurance. Is it any wonder that an artist seeking to depict a soul trapped in a tormented form would look to such a tree? Doré's engravings capture this perfectly. The sense that the wood itself is tense, that it is straining, that it is alive in its stillness. He was drawing the soul of a bristlecone pine. Or consider the ancient yews of old European churchyards. They too are masters of gnarling and twisting. The yew has a remarkable survival strategy. As its central trunk ages and begins to hollow out, it can send down aerial roots from its branches inside the hollow core. These roots reach the soil and effectively form new trunks within the old one. Over centuries, the original tree becomes a shell, a hollow cylinder housing a whole new generation of itself. It is a living paradox, a creature that renews itself from within, wearing its own history as a cloak. From the outside, it looks like a single, ancient, impossibly contorted being. Its bark is flaky, reddish-brown, and often peels away to reveal smooth, muscle-like contours beneath. Its branches can fuse together, creating strange windows and arches. It is a living ruin, a self-sustaining cathedral of wood. This is the kind of form that haunts the imagination. It speaks of cycles, of age, of life persisting within decay, themes that are central to any exploration of an underworld. The gnarling isn't just about age and weather, though. It's also about injury. When a tree is damaged by lightning, a falling branch, or the feeding of an animal, it doesn't heal in the same way we do. It cannot replace the damaged tissue. Instead, it must grow around the wound. This process is called compartmentalization. The tree forms a barrier of specialized cells to seal off the injured area, preventing the spread of decay or disease into the rest of its body. Then new layers of wood, new growth rings, are laid down around this sealed-off wound. Over years, decades, and centuries, this creates burls, knots, and strange swellings in the trunk. These are the tree's scars. They are bulges of memory, wooden monuments to past trauma. A forest of old trees is a forest of survivors, each one bearing the physical record of its battles. When Dante imagined a forest where souls were encased in trees that bled and cried out when a twig was snapped, he was creating a supernatural metaphor for a very natural process, the idea of a living thing that carries its wounds visibly, that is shaped and defined by the pain it has endured. The artists who followed him simply had to walk into the nearest old-growth forest to find their models. The silent, stoic suffering was already there, written in the bark. From the echo of form, let us now turn to the echo of entanglement. Dante's wood is a place of confinement, where one being is trapped within another, its identity subsumed. It's a powerful psychological metaphor, but it is also a startlingly accurate description of certain botanical relationships that play out every day in forests all over the world. This is the world of the parasitic and the epiphytic, the world of the vine and the strangler. Consider the strangler fig. In tropical forests, its life begins not in the dark soil of the forest floor, but high in the canopy of a host tree. A bird or a monkey eats a fig, and deposits the tiny sticky seed in a crevice of bark on a high branch. In that little pocket of accumulated debris and moisture, the seed germinates. At first it is harmless, a tiny epiphyte, a plant that grows on another plant without being a parasite. It sends out small leaves to gather sunlight and begins to send a long, slender root down the trunk of its host. This root is patient. It grows slowly, sometimes for years, a thin, unassuming cord snaking its way towards the earth. Once it reaches the ground, everything changes. Anchored in the soil, the fig now has access to a constant supply of water and nutrients. Its growth explodes. It sends down more roots, thick and powerful, that wrap around the host's trunk. These roots branch out and fuse together, creating a dense living lattice, a cage of wood that encases the host tree. High above, the fig's own canopy begins to grow, its leaves spreading out, shading and outcompeting the leaves of the tree that gave it its start. The host is now being attacked on two fronts. Its trunk is being girdled by the ever-tightening network of roots, constricting the flow of nutrients up from its own roots, and its access to sunlight is being stolen by the fig's burgeoning crown. It is a slow, silent siege, an act of botanical patience that unfolds over decades. Eventually the host tree dies. It is starved of light and strangled by the fig's embrace, but it does not fall. It is held upright by the rigid, hollow cylinder of the strangler fig's fused roots. Over time, the dead wood of the host rots away, leaving behind the most extraordinary structure, a new tree, the strangler fig, with a completely hollow core, standing in the exact spot where its host once stood. It wears the shape of its former support, like a memory. It is a monument to a slow, methodical conquest. Can you imagine a more potent natural metaphor for the slow erosion of the self, for one identity being overwritten and replaced by another? The artistic renditions of the wood of the suicides often show human forms merging with tree trunks, limbs becoming branches. The artists were depicting a fantasy, but nature had already perfected the reality. The strangler fig is a living sculpture of Dante's vision. And there are other, more subtle forms of entanglement. Think of the climbing vines, the lianas. In many forests, they are a dominant feature, creating a web that connects the entire ecosystem. They are masters of outsourcing their own structural support. A tree must spend enormous amounts of energy building a thick, strong trunk to hold its leaves up to the sunlight. A liana dispenses with this. It is a brilliant opportunist. It remains slender and flexible, using the architecture of the trees as its scaffolding. It races up trunks, its grappling hooks and tendrils finding purchase in the bark, its sole ambition to reach the canopy as quickly and efficiently as possible. But this convenience comes at a cost for the trees. A heavy infestation of lianas can weigh down a tree's branches, making them more likely to break in a storm. Their dense foliage can shade out the tree's own leaves. They create bridges in the canopy, allowing leaf-eating insects and arboreal mammals to move easily from one tree to the next, potentially increasing grazing pressure. In a sense, they are parasites of structure. They contribute nothing to the strength of the forest, yet they reap the benefits of its height. Again, the visual is one of entanglement, of one life form clinging to and depending on another. The dense, chaotic, almost claustrophobic feel of a jungle, a place where it's hard to tell where one plant ends and another begins, is a direct result of this strategy. It's an image of confusion, of lost individuality, played out on a massive ecological scale. When artists drew the tangled, impenetrable thickets of hell, they were simply amplifying the beautiful, brutal competition that defines a real forest canopy. Then there are the true parasites, plants that have given up on photosynthesis altogether. Consider the dodder plant, also known as strangleweed or devil's guts. It looks like a bizarre, stringy orange or yellow mass of spaghetti draped over other plants. It has no leaves to speak of and no chlorophyll. It cannot make its own food. A dodder seed germinates in the soil, and a thin, questing shoot emerges. It has only a few days to find a host. It grows in a spiral, sweeping its tip in a circular motion, as if sniffing the air for the chemical signature of a nearby plant. If it makes contact, it immediately wraps itself around the stem of its victim. Then it performs a kind of botanical surgery. It grows tiny projections called haustoria, which penetrate the host plant's vascular tissue, its xylem and phloem. These haustoria are like microscopic taps, plugging the dodder directly into the host's circulatory system. The dodder begins to siphon off water and sugars, the very lifeblood of the host. Once this connection is secure, the dodder's original root withers and dies. It severs its connection to the earth entirely, living now as a complete dependent, a web of orange filaments drawing all of its sustenance from another. It is the very picture of dependency, a life built on the life of another. The legacy of Dante's imagery is not just that it's a compelling story, it's that the story's core mechanics of being trapped, of being consumed, of losing one's own vitality to another, are reenacted all around us in the quiet, desperate struggles of the plant kingdom. Now, let us listen. Let's explore the echo of voice. One of the most haunting details in Dante's Canto is that the trees do not speak until they are broken. When a branch is snapped, words and blood spill forth. It is the violation that gives them a voice. This too has a profound and subtle parallel in the real world. A forest is not a silent place. We may perceive it as quiet, a respite from our noisy world, but it is filled with sound, with a language of its own, and much of that language is the sound of stress and breaking. Stand in a forest, especially an old one, during a strong wind, and just listen. You will hear the whisper of wind through the needles and leaves, of course, but listen deeper. You will hear the groaning of wood. This is the sound of massive tree trunks, weighing many tons, flexing and swaying. You will hear the rubbing and scraping of branches against each other. This friction is a constant source of stress, and trees have evolved to deal with it. Many species exhibit something called crown shyness, where the topmost crowns of individual trees grow in such a way that they leave gaps between them, avoiding contact. It creates a beautiful mosaic-like pattern against the sky, a network of channels. It is a silent, spatial conversation between neighbors, a mutual agreement to keep a respectful distance to avoid damaging each other in the wind. But where they do touch, they speak, they creak and moan. It is the sound of immense weight and tension, a chorus of wooden voices speaking the language of physics, and there are other, quieter sounds. On a still, hot day, if you are very lucky and have very sensitive ears, or perhaps a specialized microphone, you can sometimes hear the inner workings of a tree. A tree is a massive hydraulic pump, moving water from its roots to its leaves, sometimes hundreds of feet into the air. This column of water is held together by cohesion and is under immense tension, like a stretched rubber band. Occasionally this tension becomes too great, and an air bubble, an embolism, can form in one of the tiny water-conducting tubes, the xylem. This is called cavitation. When this bubble forms, it creates a tiny, high-pitched acoustic pop or click. The water column breaks. It is the sound of a tiny internal rupture. A single tree can produce thousands of these clicks on a dry day. It is the audible evidence of thirst, the sound of the tree's plumbing straining under pressure. It is, in a very real sense, the sound of a tree's suffering. And of course there is the most definitive sound of all, the crack and crash of a falling branch, or a whole tree giving way. This is the sound of gravity finally winning a century-long battle. It is a dramatic, violent event that rips a hole in the canopy, allowing sunlight to spill onto the forest floor for the first time in decades. It is an act of destruction, but also an act of creation. That single loud report, that final wooden scream, is the signal for a new generation of life to begin. The death of the old makes way for the new. The idea of a tree having a voice, especially a voice in pain, is not pure fantasy. It is a poetic interpretation of real, measurable, acoustic events. The forest speaks a language of stress, tension, breaking, and release. Dante and the artists who followed were simply tuning their imaginations to a frequency that is always there, waiting to be heard. Finally, we must go deeper, into the undergrowth itself, to explore the echo of despair and the strange hope that lies within it. A hellscape is often imagined as a place of decay, of darkness, of things ending. Dante's wood is bleak and lifeless, its ground barren, but in a real forest, the ground, the undergrowth, the place of decay, is the most vital and life-giving part of the entire ecosystem. It's a paradox that is central to understanding the natural world. What looks like an ending is always a beginning. The forest floor is a city of the dead, and it is bustling with life. Every fallen leaf, every shed piece of bark, every toppled giant of a tree becomes the foundation for new existence. This is the realm of the decomposers, the quiet, unsung heroes of the forest. The fungi are the chief architects of this process. Their main body is not the mushroom we see, which is only the temporary reproductive structure. The true organism is the mycelium, a vast, intricate network of microscopic threads or hyphae that permeates the soil and the rotting wood. This network is less like the roots of a single plant and more like nature's own quiet, underground internet, a web of life that connects the entire forest. When a tree falls, the mycelial network is among the first to arrive. It infiltrates the wood, and its hyphae begin to secrete powerful enzymes. These enzymes are the keys that unlock the complex molecules of cellulose and lignin, the tough materials that give wood its structure. They are molecules that few other organisms can digest. The fungi break them down, slowly, patiently, turning the solid wood back into soft, nutrient-rich soil. If you pick up a piece of rotting wood in a forest, you can often crumble it in your hands. It is soft and damp, and smells of earth. That softness is the work of fungi. You are holding the ghost of a tree, a form that is being gently dismantled and prepared for its next life. This process, which looks like decay, is an act of profound generosity. The nutrients that the tree spent centuries accumulating, the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, are not lost. They are unlocked and released back into the soil, where they become available for the roots of the next generation of trees, for the wildflowers, for the ferns. The death of the giant provides the feast for the infants that will grow in the light its fall created. It is a perfect, closed loop, a system with no waste. The despair of the individual death is the foundation of the community's continued life, and the fungi are not alone. They have partners in this great recycling project. Bacteria, of course, but also a staggering diversity of tiny animals. The millipedes, with their armored segments, chew through decaying leaves. The earthworms tunnel through the soil, aerating it and mixing the organic matter. The tiny springtails and mites, too small for us to notice without looking closely, graze on fungal hyphae and microscopic debris. It is a world of constant consumption and excretion, a dynamic subterranean engine turning death into life. The smell of a healthy forest floor, that rich, damp, loamy scent, is the smell of this process. It is the perfume of decomposition, the fragrance of renewal. When Gustave Doré engraved his images of the wood of the suicides, he often paid close attention to the ground. It is dark, tangled with roots, sometimes littered with the bodies of the damned. He captured the feeling of a dark, oppressive and final place. But a real forest floor is the opposite of final. It is a place of infinite potential. It is the repository of all the forest's past and the cradle of all its future. The legacy of Dante's vision, then, is a kind of challenge. It presents us with an image of sterile, static despair, and in doing so it prompts us to look at the real world of decay and see it for what it is, not an end, but the very engine of transformation. So where does this leave us? The echoes in the undergrowth are not just artistic or literary, they are biological. The power of Dante's vision, and the art it inspired, comes from its deep resonance with the truths of the natural world. The gnarled tree as a record of a life of hardship, the strangler fig as a metaphor for a stolen identity, the groaning of branches and the popping of xylem as the voice of suffering, the dark, rich soil as a place where death is constantly being transfigured into new life. These are archetypes. They are powerful because they tap into a knowledge that is older than poetry, older than art. It is the knowledge that our species grew up with, the deep, innate understanding of the forest as a place of both sanctuary and danger, of beauty and brutality, of life and death, all tangled together. Biologists might call it biophilia, our innate tendency to focus on and affiliate with life and lifelike processes. We are attuned to these patterns. A twisted tree trunk doesn't just look like wood, it looks like a tormented body because our brains are pattern-seeking machines and we see humanity everywhere. A dense, tangled thicket doesn't just look like plants, it feels claustrophobic because our evolutionary history has taught us to be wary of places where we can't see clearly, where predators might hide. Dante was a genius, not because he invented a new hell, but because he built his hell out of the fundamental, observable truths of the world around him. He gave a moral and narrative structure to the silent, everyday dramas of the forest. And the artists who followed, Blake and Doré and so many others, were not merely copying his words. They were conducting their own observations, looking at the world with the poet's eyes and confirming his vision. They saw the struggle, the entanglement, the strange and sorrowful beauty, and they drew it. The legacy of this poetic hellscape is not confined to a library shelf or a museum wall. It is out there, in the undergrowth. It is in the patient architecture of a bristlecone pine, in the slow embrace of a strangler fig, in the quiet sigh of a forest in the wind. These echoes remind us that the most powerful stories we tell are the ones that are already being told by the world itself, in the silent, persistent, and endlessly intricate language of life. We just have to learn how to listen. Chapter 6, Aokigahara, a modern manifestation. And if we listen, truly listen, there is one place on earth where the silence tells a story more profound and more sorrowful than almost any other. A place where the echoes of human despair seem to have soaked into the very soil, or rather, into the very rock. We leave the pages of a 14th century Italian poem and travel now, across centuries and continents, to the foot of a mountain that is itself a national soul. We find ourselves in Japan, standing at the edge of a place known locally and poetically as Jukai, the Sea of Trees. To the rest of the world, it is known by a name that carries a much heavier weight, Aokigahara. This is not a forest born of deep, rich earth, nurtured over millennia. This is an ecosystem born of cataclysm. It is a testament to the patient, indomitable force of life, sprouting directly from the hardened artery of a volcano. To understand this forest, we must first understand the ground on which it stands, for they are inseparable. We must go back to the year 864 AD, the Heian period of Japan. Mount Fuji, the serene conical icon we know today, was not so peaceful. It was a terrifying and awesome power, and in that year, a colossal eruption occurred on its northwestern flank. For weeks the earth trembled, fissures split the mountainside, and from them a river of fire began to flow. This was not the explosive ash cloud-producing eruption we often imagine. This was a quieter, more insidious event. This was a flood of basaltic lava, a black molten tide that poured relentlessly down the slopes, incinerating everything in its path. It flowed for miles, a creeping carpet of liquid rock, filling valleys and damming rivers, reshaping the very geography of the landscape. It finally cooled, solidifying into a vast, uneven plateau of black rock, 30 square kilometers of sterile, jagged stone. This is the foundation of Aokigahara. It is not soil, it is a frozen wave of volcanic basalt, sharp and porous, riddled with chasms, tunnels and caves where gas bubbles were trapped as the rock cooled. Imagine standing on this primordial landscape, just after the heat has dissipated, but before the first seed has found purchase. It would be a place of profound silence, a dark alien world. The rock underfoot would be a chaotic sculpture of rippling, rope-like formations known as pahoho lava and jagged, broken chunks of clinker called lava. The surface would be a labyrinth of sharp edges and deep, hidden cracks. There would be no scent of loam or decay, only the faint metallic tang of cooling minerals. This was the canvas, and upon this seemingly impossible canvas, nature, the patient artist, began to paint. The first colonists were not trees. They were the humblest and most tenacious of life's pioneers, the lichens. They are a remarkable collaboration, a symbiotic partnership between a fungus and an alga. The fungus provides the structure, a tough, resilient anchor that can cling to the barest surface of the rock, while the alga, through photosynthesis, creates the food. These tiny, slow-growing organisms are nature's first chemists. Over decades, over centuries, they secreted weak acids that began the microscopic, painstaking process of breaking down the volcanic rock. They were the first to turn stone into something that could, eventually, support life. After the lichens came the mosses, carpets of brilliant green, finding purchase in the minute cracks and depressions where the lichen had done its initial work. Mosses are like living sponges. They have no deep roots, but they are masters of capturing and holding moisture. They trapped the rain, the morning dew, and any wind-blown dust or organic debris that drifted over this barren expanse. Slowly, infinitesimally, they began to create the first thin veneer of soil. A millimeter at a time, over generations, they built a damp green cushion upon the unforgiving black rock. It is this moss that gives Aokigahara its first and most defining sensory characteristic, its silence. Walk into the forest today, and the most striking thing is not what you see, but what you don't hear. The world outside seems to fall away, muted. The sound is absorbed, swallowed by the forest floor, that thick verdant carpet of moss covering nearly every surface. The ground, the exposed roots, the fallen logs, acts as a natural acoustic dampener. It is like stepping into a recording studio, a room padded to prevent any echo, any reverberation. Footsteps make little sound. Voices don't carry. There is a deep, muffling quiet that is both profoundly peaceful and deeply unsettling. It's a silence that encourages introspection, a silence that can feel isolating, a silence that makes you acutely aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat. Into this nascent bed of moss and weathered rock, the first seeds arrived, carried on the wind or by birds. Not the great trees, not yet, but hardy grasses, wild flowers, and small tenacious shrubs. Their tiny roots probed the cracks, seeking out the little pockets of accumulated soil. They grew, and in their dying, they contributed their own bodies to this slow, deliberate creation of a forest floor. Each fallen leaf, each withered stem, was a contribution, a single sentence in the long story of this ecosystem's birth. And then, finally, came the trees. The Japanese hemlock, the hinoki cypress, the Fuji cherry. But they could not grow as trees do in a normal forest. There was no deep, soft earth for their roots to plunge into. Their life support system, the volcanic rock, was just inches below the surface. So they adapted. This is the source of the forest's second most visually striking feature, the roots. The trees of Aokigahara do not have a hidden underworld. Their biology is laid bare for all to see. The roots, unable to penetrate the solid lava, spread outwards, laterally, like a vast interconnected net cast across the surface of the rock. They snake over the mossy ground, twisting around each other, gripping the contours of the ancient lava flow in a desperate gnarled embrace. They look like petrified serpents, like the exposed tendons of some great subterranean beast. They trip the unwary walker and create a landscape that feels ancient, tangled and wild. There is a strange intimacy to it, as if the forest has decided not to keep any secrets from you, showing you the very system of veins and arteries that keeps it alive. It is a constant, visible reminder of the struggle for life in this place. Each tree is a testament to a battle won against impossible odds, a victory of soft, persistent life over hard, indifferent stone. Because of this shallow root system, the trees are intensely vulnerable to the wind. A strong typhoon can tear through the forest, and because the trees have no deep anchor, they are easily toppled. This results in a chaotic forest floor, littered with fallen giants, their root plates ripped from the mossy ground and exposed to the air like giant earthen shields. These fallen trees are not cleared away. They become part of the ecosystem's cycle. They become nurse logs. The decaying wood becomes a rich, fertile bed, a perfect nursery for new seeds to germinate. And so you will see young, vibrant saplings growing in a perfectly straight line, sprouting from the spine of a long-dead ancestor. It is a forest that is constantly rebuilding itself upon its own ruins, a cycle of death and rebirth played out in slow motion. The forest canopy is dense, a thick roof of leaves and needles that blocks out much of the sunlight. Even on a bright day, the forest floor is cast in a perpetual twilight. This lack of light, combined with the unique soil composition, means there is very little undergrowth in many parts of the forest. You can often see for some distance between the trunks of the trees, but the view is always the same, an endless repetition of moss, rock and tangled roots. This uniformity is deeply disorienting. There are few landmarks. Every direction looks like the one you just came from. It is a natural labyrinth, a place where the human instinct for direction is easily confounded. This physical disorientation is compounded by a peculiar geological quirk. The volcanic rock on which the forest stands is rich in iron, creating a localized magnetic anomaly. While it is not strong enough to render a modern GPS useless, it can and does affect a traditional magnetic compass. A hiker relying on one might find the needle behaving erratically, spinning or pointing in the wrong direction. In an already disorienting landscape, this single scientific fact, magnetite in the basaltic lava, has fueled centuries of folklore. It adds another layer of unease, a sense that the natural laws are suspended here, that the forest itself is actively trying to confuse you, to keep you, and so we have a place of profound silence, a place of visual uniformity where it is easy to become lost, a place where compasses can fail, a place of perpetual twilight, built upon a chaotic and treacherous foundation of sharp rock and hidden caves. It is a landscape that feels otherworldly, a stage perfectly set for stories of the supernatural. Long before its modern tragic reputation, Aokigahara was associated with the yurei, the traditional ghosts of Japanese folklore. These are not typically malevolent spirits, but souls in turmoil, often those who died suddenly, tragically, or with unresolved emotions. They are believed to be trapped between the world of the living and the afterlife. A forest so quiet, so disorienting, so isolated from the world of human noise and structure, was seen as a place where the veil between these worlds was thin. It was a place where one might wander, and in a moment of inattention, cross a boundary not meant to be crossed. This association with lonely death was deepened by the persistent, though likely apocryphal, legends of Ubisut. The term translates roughly to abandoning an old woman and refers to an alleged custom from feudal Japan during times of famine or drought, where an elderly or infirm relative would be carried to a remote mountain or forest and left to die, to reduce the number of mouths to feed. While historians largely agree this was not a common or socially accepted practice, the stories persisted as a kind of cautionary folklore, and Aokigahara, with its isolating and unforgiving nature, became one of the places most famously associated with these grim tales. The image of a son carrying his aged mother into the silent, tangled woods, leaving her to the elements, is a powerful and haunting one. It seeded the forest's consciousness with a deep foundational sorrow, associating it with a form of familial despair. But the forest's modern notoriety, its transformation from a place of local folklore into a global symbol of suicide, is a much more recent phenomenon, and it was cemented not by ancient custom but by modern media. In 1960, the celebrated Japanese author Seicho Matsumoto published a novel called Nami no To, or Tower of Waves. In the story, a tragic heroine, her love affair doomed, retreats into Aokigahara to take her own life. The novel was a bestseller, and its poignant, romanticized depiction of the forest as a beautiful, lonely, and fitting place to die had a profound and unforeseen impact. It was a cultural catalyst. Suddenly, Aokigahara was no longer just a local haunted woods. It was a nationally recognized destination, imbued with a kind of literary, tragic romance. The book was followed by a film, and the idea of the forest as a final resting place entered the public imagination. It is a strange and sad example of life imitating art. The forest's inherent qualities, the silence, the isolation, the beauty, were recontextualized through the lens of this popular story, and it began to attract people from all over Japan who were in the depths of despair. And so, we must tread carefully here, because this is no longer a discussion of geology or folklore. It is a story of profound human pain. The forest itself is, of course, entirely indifferent. It is a biological system. A tree does not judge, moss does not grieve. The birds that live here, the Siberian blue robin, the Eurasian wren, the great spotted woodpecker, sing their territorial songs without any knowledge of the human narratives being projected onto their home. The Asian black bears that roam the woods, the Japanese mink that hunt by the small ponds, the moles that burrow in the few deep pockets of soil, they are all simply living their lives according to biological imperatives that stretch back millions of years. The forest continues its slow, patient work. Rainwater filters through the moss and drips into the subterranean world, collecting in the lava tubes and caves that riddle the rock beneath the roots. Some of these caves are so well insulated from the surface temperature that they remain frozen year-round, creating spectacular ice formations. The Narusawa Ice Cave and the Fugaku Wind Cave are two of the most famous natural wonders forged in fire and ice. They are a reminder of the sheer geological power that created this place, a world beneath the world of trees. When you walk through the forest, you might see thin, colourful plastic tapes tied to the trees, snaking off the main paths and into the dense woods. These are often laid by those who enter the forest with ambivalent intentions. They are a lifeline, a way back to the world should they change their minds. Sometimes they lead to a small abandoned campsite. Sometimes they simply stop. They are a fragile human intrusion on the landscape, a stark, silent testament to a moment of profound crisis. They are a modern-day trail of breadcrumbs, laid out not in a fairy tale forest of witches and woodcutters, but in a real wood of moss and lava and unbearable sadness. In response to the forest's reputation, local authorities and volunteer groups have tried to intervene. They have placed signs at the trailheads, not with warnings or prohibitions, but with gentle, compassionate messages. In Japanese, they offer messages like, "Your life is a precious gift from your parents," or "Please think of your family," alongside a phone number for a suicide prevention hotline. Patrols walk the paths, not as police, but as concerned citizens, looking for anyone who seems lost or in distress, offering a quiet word, a bottle of water, a way out. It is a strange juxtaposition, an ecosystem born from one of the most violent forces on our planet, a volcanic eruption, has become a place associated with the quietest and most internal of human tragedies, and this brings us back to Dante. The wood of the suicides in his Inferno was a place of punishment. The souls of those who threw away their bodies were encased in twisted, gnarled trees, unable to speak unless their branches were broken, causing them pain. It was a landscape of eternal, agonizing regret. Aokigahara is different. It is not a place of punishment. For those who seek it out, it is often seen as a place of refuge. The silence is not a torment, but a release from the noise of the world. The isolation is not a punishment, but an escape from social pressures and perceived failures. The gnarled roots and mossy ground are not symbols of a twisted afterlife, but a setting of immense natural beauty, a final peaceful bed. The parallel is not in the nature of divine judgment, but in the choice of a forest as the backdrop for this specific form of human despair. Why a forest? Why do these dense, silent woodlands, whether in a medieval Italian poem or at the foot of Mount Fuji, become the designated repositories for this kind of tragedy? Perhaps it is because a forest is a place outside of human society. It operates on a different timescale, by a different set of rules. The life and death of a single human is a fleeting moment against the centuries-long life of a cypress tree or the millennia-long weathering of a volcanic rock. There is a kind of comfort in that scale, a sense of being subsumed into something larger, something ancient and eternal, that cares nothing for the failures and anxieties of a single human life. A city is a monument to human rules, human society, human judgment. Every street corner, every building, is a reminder of the world one might be trying to escape. But a forest is a place of anonymity. It promises to hold a secret. Its dense canopy hides you from the sky. Its mossy floor muffles your final footfalls. It offers a return to the earth, a gentle green and silent dissolution back into the cycles of nature. The life within Aokigahara is a study in quiet persistence. We can look at the unique species of fungi that have adapted to decompose the specific types of wood found here. We can study the insect life, the way a particular beetle finds its home in the bark of a hemlock. We can marvel at the delicate, ghost-like beauty of the Monotropastrum humile, a strange parasitic plant that lacks chlorophyll entirely. Because it does not photosynthesize, it has no need for sunlight and can grow in the darkest parts of the forest floor. It is a pale, waxy white, almost translucent, pushing its way up through the moss and dead leaves. It taps into the underground fungal network, drawing its nutrients indirectly from the great trees around it. It is a perfect symbol of the forest itself, a strange, quiet and beautiful life that thrives in the deep shade. The forest of Aokigahara did not ask for its reputation. It is a place of profound biological and geological wonder, a living laboratory of ecological succession. It is a story of life's tenacity, of its ability to conquer the most sterile and hostile of environments. The mosses, the fungi, the insects, the trees, they are all engaged in the slow, silent and intricate dance of existence. They are what the forest truly is. The human sorrow that has become associated with it is a story we have written over it, a projection of our own pain onto a silent green canvas. Yet the two have become inseparable. To talk of the forest's unique ecosystem without acknowledging the human weight it now carries would be incomplete. And to speak only of the tragedy without seeing the incredible life that pulses in every mossy crevice would be to miss the forest for the ghosts. It is both. It is a sea of trees, and it is a sea of sorrow. It is a place of geological marvel, and it is a place of human crisis. It is a modern manifestation of Dante's dark wood, not through direct lineage, but through a shared human impulse to seek out the wild, the silent, the unjudging wilderness as the final arbiter of our fate. Dante entered his dark wood lost, and through a long and arduous journey, found his way out. The tragedy of Aokigahara is that it has become known as a place where people go to get lost and to stay lost. But the forest itself is not the end. It is a place of endless cycles, of constant quiet renewal. A fallen tree becomes a nursery for new life. A cooled lava flow becomes the foundation for a thriving ecosystem. It is a powerful if somber reminder that even on the hardest, most barren ground, life in its patient and mysterious way will always, eventually, find a way to grow. And as we leave this silent green world, we are left to ponder how a place so full of life could become so synonymous with death. The answer, it seems, lies not in the soil or the trees, but in ourselves. We just have to learn how to listen. Chapter 7. Rewilding the Soul. Nature as both Inferno and Paradiso. To learn how to listen, it sounds so simple, doesn't it? But what are we listening for? In our world, a world of sirens and notifications, of conversations and engines, listening is often a defensive act. We listen for our name, for a warning, for a piece of information we need to act upon. But in a forest, the listening is different. It is an act of reception, not extraction. It is a slow and patient opening of the self. At first, you hear only the most obvious things, the percussive tap of a woodpecker on a dead snag, a sound that is both an announcement of its presence and the diligent work of its life. You hear the wind, a sound we think we know, but in a forest, the wind is given 1,000 different voices. It is a low sigh in the high pines, a papery rustle in the dry leaves of an oak, a frantic shushing in a grove of aspen. Each tree is an instrument, and the forest is the orchestra, playing a symphony that changes with the weather, the season, and the time of day. But if you stay, if you let the rhythm of your own breathing slow to match the pace of the place around you, you begin to hear more. You hear the tiny clicks and scuttles in the leaf litter, the secret, urgent business of beetles and shrews. You hear the almost imperceptible hum of 1,000 insects, a foundational thrum of life that underpins everything. You might even hear the quiet drip of water from moss, long after a rain has passed, as the forest slowly releases the moisture it has held. This is the first step, to move from the inferno of a mind lost in its own dark wood to the paradise of a world observed. It is a journey that begins not with a grand pilgrimage, but with the simple, radical act of paying attention to what is real, to what is right here. And as you listen with your ears, you begin to listen with your whole body. You begin to feel the air, not just as warm or cold, but as a presence. You feel its weight, its humidity. You can feel the subtle shift as you walk from an open, sunlit patch into the deep, cool shade of an old hemlock. A change in temperature that feels like stepping through a doorway into another room. You can feel the texture of the world under your feet, the soft give of damp soil, the brittle crunch of fallen twigs, the solid, unyielding reality of a stone. And then there is the scent. The air in a forest is not empty. It is a thick, complex tapestry of chemical information. We call it the smell of the woods, but that is like calling all the books in a library the smell of paper. It is so much more specific, so much more detailed. It is the sharp, clean, resinous scent of pine needles, a smell that is both invigorating and calming. It is the deep, rich, earthy smell of decay, the smell of damp soil and crumbling logs, which is not the smell of death, but the smell of life recycling itself. It is the faint, sweet perfume of a hidden wildflower, a delicate note in the grand composition. What you are breathing in is not just air, it is the forest's own exhalation. The trees in their silent chemical conversations release a constant stream of volatile organic compounds into the atmosphere, These are called phytoncides, a word that comes from the Greek for plant and to kill. For the tree, these are practical tools. They are its airborne defense system, a shield against harmful bacteria, a deterrent to insects that would eat its leaves, a way to inhibit the growth of competing fungi. A pine tree releases arfapinene, the compound that gives it that characteristic scent, not for our pleasure, but to protect itself from bark beetles and fungal spores. A citrus tree releases limonene as a natural insecticide. These are ancient weapons in a silent, slow-motion war that has been waged for millions of years. But something remarkable happens when we step into this chemical crossfire. Our bodies, which evolved over millennia in and around these forests, still know this language. When we breathe in these phytoncides, our own bodies respond. It is not a placebo. It is not a poetic metaphor. It is measurable, verifiable biology. Studies have shown that after just a few hours of walking in a forest, the number and activity of a specific type of white blood cell in our bodies, the natural killer or NK cell, increases significantly. These are the frontline soldiers of our immune system, the cells responsible for seeking out and destroying virally infected cells and early-stage tumors. The forest, in the simple act of defending itself, is also lending us its shield. The air itself is a form of medicine, offered freely and silently. This practice has a name in Japan, Shinrin-yoku, which translates to forest bathing. The name is perfect because it captures the essence of the experience. It is not about hiking or exercise or reaching a destination. It is about immersion. It is about letting the forest atmosphere wash over you, bathing your senses and your physiology in its complex healing chemistry. Your blood pressure lowers, your heart rate slows. The levels of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline in your blood decrease measurably. You are, in a very real sense, calming down at a cellular level. This is the forest, not as an inferno of tangled branches and lost paths, but as a sanctuary, a sanatorium. It is nature as Paradiso, not in a grand theological sense, but in a quiet biological one. It is a place of restoration, and this restoration goes deeper than just our physical bodies. It reaches into the very structure of our minds. Think about the quality of attention required to navigate a modern city. You are constantly on guard. Your focus is sharp, directed, and relentless. You must watch for traffic, read signs, navigate crowds, ignore a barrage of advertisements, and filter out a cacophony of noise. This is called directed attention, and it is a finite resource. Like a muscle, it gets tired. When it's fatigued, we become irritable, distracted, and prone to error. We call this feeling mental fatigue, and it is the chronic condition of modern life. We try to restore it by scrolling through our phones or watching television, but these activities often just demand more of the same kind of directed attention, leaving us even more depleted. Now, think about the quality of attention you use in a forest. You are not on guard in the same way. Your attention is drawn, not directed. It is captured effortlessly by the movement of a leaf in the wind, the pattern of sunlight on the forest floor, the sound of a distant stream. This is what psychologists Rachel and Stephen Kaplan called soft fascination. It is a form of attention that is gentle, undemanding, and deeply restorative. It holds our interest but leaves plenty of room for reflection, for our minds to wander in a calm, unstructured way. This is the core of their attention restoration theory. The theory proposes that natural environments are uniquely suited to restoring our depleted mental resources precisely because they offer this soft fascination. The forest does not shout for your attention, it invites it. It allows your directed attention muscle to relax, to recover. This is why a walk in the woods feels so different from a walk down a busy street. It is not just that it is quieter or prettier, it is that it engages your mind in a fundamentally different and more healing way. You leave not more tired, but with your mind feeling clearer, sharper, and calmer. The tangled wood of the mind begins to feel a little more open, a little more sunlit. This deep, innate connection we have to the natural world has a name: biophilia. Coined by the great biologist E.O. Wilson, it is the hypothesis that we as a species possess an inherent tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. It is not a sentimental idea, it is an evolutionary one. For 99% of human history, we lived as part of the natural world, not apart from it. Our senses, our minds, our bodies were shaped by the rhythms of the sun and moon, the challenges of the landscape, and the constant presence of other living things. Our survival depended on our ability to read the language of the forest, to know which plants were medicine and which were poison, to understand the habits of animals, to recognize the signs of changing weather. Our modern, indoor, urbanized lives are a tiny recent blip in that vast evolutionary timeline. We have built environments that are in many ways alien to our own biology, and we feel the effects of that disconnect, the sense of anxiety, of being unmoored, of a low-grade chronic stress. These can be seen as symptoms of an ecosystem imbalance, not just in the world around us but within us. We are, in a sense, a species living in an enclosure that is not quite suited to our needs. Forest bathing and simply spending time in nature is not an escape from reality. It is a return to the environment in which we were made. It is coming home. And this brings us to a profound and beautiful idea that is gaining ground in the world of conservation: rewilding. On the surface, rewilding is an ecological concept. It is about restoring ecosystems to a more self-willed, self-sustaining state. It is not just about preserving a single species, but about restoring the complex web of relationships that allows a landscape to thrive. It often involves reintroducing keystone species, animals whose presence has a disproportionately large effect on their environment. The classic example is the reintroduction of grey wolves to Yellowstone National Park in 1995. For 70 years, the park had been without its apex predator. In their absence, the elk population had exploded. They grazed voraciously, especially on the young willow and aspen trees that grew along the riverbanks. Without these trees, the riverbanks began to erode. The rivers became wider, shallower, and straighter. The lack of trees also meant a lack of habitat for songbirds. The beaver population, which depended on willows for food and building materials, dwindled, and with them the dams that create ponds and wetlands, crucial habitats for otters, muskrats, and amphibians. The entire system was out of balance, a simplified and degraded version of its former self. When the wolves returned, everything began to change. They are a keystone species, a linchpin that holds the whole structure together. The wolves preyed on the elk, which was expected, but their true impact was more subtle and far-reaching. They changed the behavior of the elk. The elk began to avoid the open river valleys and gorges where they could be easily hunted, and in these places, the willows and aspens began to grow back. In some areas, the trees shot up to 5 times their previous height in just a few years. This was the beginning of a cascade of effects, what ecologists call a trophic cascade. As the trees returned, so did the songbirds. As the willows returned, so did the beavers. The beavers, those brilliant engineers, began to build dams again. The dams created new ponds and wetlands, which brought back the otters, the muskrats, the ducks, and the fish. The wolves killed coyotes, which led to a rise in the number of rabbits and mice, which in turn meant more food for hawks, weasels, and foxes. The bears returned to feast on the berries that grew on the regenerating shrubs. Most astonishingly, the wolves changed the rivers themselves. The regenerating forests stabilized the riverbanks, so they eroded less. The channels narrowed, became more meandering. More pools and riffles formed. The very geography of the park began to shift, to become more complex and more stable, all because of the return of one species. The wolves, simply by being themselves, brought the music of the ecosystem back into harmony. They rewilded the land. This is not just a story about wolves, it is a profound metaphor for our own inner lives. For many of us, our internal ecosystems have become simplified and degraded. We have, in a sense, removed the wildness from our lives, We live in predictable climate-controlled boxes. We follow routines. We suppress our instincts. Our inner landscape becomes like Yellowstone without the wolves, overgrazed by a single dominant pattern of thought, whether it's anxiety or work or repetitive worry. The diversity of our inner world shrinks. There is less room for creativity, for spontaneity, for wonder, the songbirds and beavers of our soul. To step into a forest is to engage in a form of personal rewilding. It is to reintroduce a keystone element back into our lives, our connection to the living world. Just as the presence of the wolves changed the behavior of the elk, the presence of the forest changes our behavior. We slow down, our senses awaken, our patterns of thought are disrupted by the sheer unpredictable complexity of it all. A new kind of balance begins to emerge. The overgrazing thoughts are kept in check, allowing other parts of ourselves, the quieter, more intuitive, more creative parts to grow back. We become, like the rivers of Yellowstone, less rigid, more meandering, more alive. This brings us full circle, back to Dante, standing at the edge of his dark wood. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la diritta via era smarrita. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. His forest was an inferno because it was a perfect reflection of his inner state, lost, fearful, and cut off from the light. He saw only the tangled branches, the menacing shadows, the pathless confusion. The forest was not evil in itself. It was a mirror. The horror he experienced was the horror of his own soul, projected onto the ancient trees. The journey through that inferno was a journey inward, a confrontation with the parts of himself that he had ignored or suppressed. We all have our own dark woods. They are the periods in our lives of confusion, of grief, of uncertainty, when the straight path disappears and we feel utterly lost. And in those moments, it is tempting to see the world around us as a reflection of that inner turmoil, as threatening, chaotic, and meaningless. A forest can seem like an impenetrable fortress of gloom. But what if we could learn to see it differently? What if we understood that the forest is not just a mirror for our despair, but also a map for our recovery? The same forest that appears dark and tangled is also a model of resilience. It is a community where nothing is wasted. A fallen tree, a symbol of death, is not an end, it is a beginning. It becomes a nursery for mosses and fungi, a home for insects, a source of nutrients for the soil that will feed the next generation of saplings. The forest is in a constant state of decay and rebirth, a slow, graceful dance between life and death that is not a tragedy but a sustainable and beautiful cycle. It teaches us that breakdown is an essential part of breakthrough. The same forest that seems chaotic and unstructured is governed by a deep and intricate order. The mycelial network beneath the soil, that vast hidden web of fungal threads, connects the roots of nearly every tree. It is a subterranean internet, a biological social network through which trees can share resources. A mother tree can send carbon and nutrients through the network to its shaded offspring. Trees can send chemical warning signals to their neighbors about insect attacks. It is a system of profound cooperation and interconnectedness, a silent testament to the fact that strength lies not in isolation, but in community. It teaches us that we are not alone, that we are all connected in ways we can barely perceive. The same forest that feels ancient and unchanging is a place of constant, patient growth. A towering oak tree began as a single, vulnerable acorn. Its journey was one of persistence, of turning sunlight, water, and soil into strength and stature, year after year, ring by ring. It is a living monument to the power of small, consistent efforts over a long period of time. It teaches us patience and the quiet dignity of slow, deep growth. This is the dual nature of the forest. It is both Inferno and Paradiso. It is a place where you can feel utterly lost, and a place where you can find yourself. It is a place that can reflect your deepest fears, and a place that can offer you the deepest healing. The forest itself does not change. What changes is our ability to see it, to listen to it, to receive what it is offering. Dante's journey did not end in the dark wood. It was the necessary beginning. He had to traverse the Inferno, to understand the nature of despair before he could ascend through Purgatorio and finally glimpse Paradiso. He had to get lost to find the way. Perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of the forest. It is okay to be lost sometimes. It is okay for the straight path to disappear, because it is in the pathless woods, in the places where we are forced to slow down, to pay attention, to use all of our senses, that we find a different kind of way forward. It is not a straight path, but a meandering one. It is a path that follows the contours of the land, that honors the cycles of growth and decay, that understands the deep, quiet wisdom of the trees. So the next time you find yourself in a forest, whether it is a vast, ancient wilderness or a small patch of trees in a city park, try to remember this. You are not just a visitor. You are not just an observer. You are a participant in a conversation that is as old as life itself. Let your breath slow down. Feel the ground beneath your feet. Listen to the 1,000 voices of the wind. Breathe in the complex, healing air. Let your attention be drawn to the dance of light and shadow, the texture of bark, the intricate design of a single fern. You are stepping into a place that is both a reflection of the world within you and a prescription for its health. A place that can hold your sorrow and offer you solace. A place that can seem like an inferno of chaos and reveal itself to be a paradise of intricate, resilient order. The forest is, and always has been, a mirror. The journey through its shadows is simply the journey home to ourselves, and in its quiet, sun-dappled clearings we can find a peace that feels less like an escape and more like a profound and gentle remembering of who and what we truly are, a part of this earth, a part of this life, wild and resilient and beautifully, intricately alive.